Hey there, it's Kim Kelly here. I'm a writer of Australian historical fiction, mostly. I'll be talking to Veronica in episode 20 about my genre-bending latest, Her Last Words. It's a crime story, it's a multi-layered love story, and at its heart is a missing manuscript. And I had some wicked fun spilling my beans on the Australian publishing industry in its pages. And such great fun chatting with Veronica about it all too. See you on the podcast soon.
Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination. Hello and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Australian Book Lovers podcast, episode 19. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Veronica Strachan, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, reader, one of your co-founders and hosts for today. And I'm coming to you from Woiwurrung country during this Reconciliation Week.
And I am Darren Kazenko, science fiction and horror author, reader, and one of your other co-hosts and co-founder of Australian Book Lovers. And I am coming to you today from a corner country.
Beautiful.
And here we are, episode number 19. Yay!
Hooray, episode 19. And it's interesting because the theme for Reconciliation Week is more than a word. Reconciliation takes action. So some little small actions on our part is to acknowledge the custodians, traditional owners of the lands that we work. And
Absolutely.
I'm also, my daughter attended her company, organised it for this week, organised her to have a workshop by Acknowledge This. So this is a couple of people who got together, Reese and Emma, and they teach how to do a meaningful acknowledgement of country without fear, because many non-Aboriginal people worry that they would be disrespectful, and even though we do the acknowledgement, sometimes it becomes a bit rote so that you don't understand what's behind it. So I've actually booked myself to go in and do this little session, this 2-hour session, and it talks to you about the understanding of what the acknowledgement is, the purpose of each part, and you can personalise your acknowledgement of country to adapt it to, any gathering. And what I love about it is that they talk about a shared history. So this is an Aboriginal gentleman, and the woman is from, I think she's got a mixed European heritage. I haven't heard the whole thing, so I'll have lots more information after I've had the little session. But there you go.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. And is those sorts of workshops, is that something that's available to people all across the country, or is it something
absolutely
online?
Yeah, you can go to acknowledgethis.com.au and you can it's only $30, individuals paying for themselves. They can do organisational ones, of course, but a lot of the profits go to A Better Start for Disadvantaged Indigenous Students. So you couldn't get a better opportunity to take some action in this Reconciliation Week. So it's actually 20 years since the first, reconciliation movement kind of took off in Australia.
Yeah, and I think, something along the lines of these sorts of workshops, I think the whole idea sounds fantastic, because ultimately it's, acknowledging the past absolutely is necessary, but the number one thing that is going to lead to any sort of achievements when it comes to reconciliation is having a roadmap moving forward.
Yes.
And in time. And something like this is a little bit of a bridge, I think.
Yeah.
It and hopefully, if this becomes a little bit more commonplace and a little bit more of a, standard feature in our everyday vernacular and general levels of respect when introducing anything or events or what it might be, it also hopefully opens up conversations a little bit better and breaks down those little boundaries that I think sometimes they're imaginary boundaries, but everybody has the same imagination that they exist when maybe they don't really. We're all human. And look, most of us listening to this podcast now were not born in the 1800s.
No.
So we all
Not even me.
No. So we all have a shared history that's a lot different to those histories, and so we are moving forward, I think, in time, and so too is the reconciliation process. So fantastic opportunity. I'm going to look into it. Absolutely. History.
Yeah. So unfortunately, reconciliation week finishes, today virtually, and the podcast will come out in a little while. So encourage everybody to continue to educate themselves and explore how you can contribute to achieving reconciliation, definitely in Australia, and have a bit of a look and see. Part of what we are doing is, of course, encouraging Australian and Indigenous authors to, list their works with us. Really, really happy to see any author who wants to jump on and share their books with us.
Yes, agree 100%. And you're right. There is a difference between the date today and the date the podcast will come out. It'll only be a couple of days difference, but technically the Reconciliation Week may have come to an end. Yes. However, that is just
doesn't mean don't think
an
about
imagination thing as well.
Exactly
reconciliation doesn't end.
Yes. So I'm going to keep going with my news. So I've got the inaugural Karaka Prize long list has been announced. So that's created in honour of the late Wiradjuri elder, poet, writer, activist and artist Kerry Reed Gilbert. So you can...
Hang on, before we talk about Gilbert, we need to put the officially announce the news segment.
Oh, sorry.
Here we go, the news. Yay!
All right, so some news. We have the keeping in mind Reconciliation Week, the inaugural Karaka Prize long list was announced. So that was in honour of Wiradjuri elder, poet, writer, activist and artist Kerry Reed Gilbert. And so you can read about that if you chase that up and type in Karaka, which is Kuracca, and that's for fiction, poetry, essay, memoir, creative non-fiction, cartoon or graphic stories, and digital or audio storytelling. So they had about 500 submissions across all categories, and the winner, when they finally announced, will get $5,000 and two runners-up will get $1,000, and the three winners will get published in Overland. So that's another website for readers and writers to have a bit of a look at.
That sounds great. And when it comes to the prizes, is there individual prizes for individual mediums, or is it overall?
No, just three overall. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But in line with that being for the late Wiradjuri elder, poet, writer, activist and artist Kerry Reed Gilbert, I have a book review that you'll be able to listen to at the end of this podcast by Professor Anita Heiss. Now, I think I've tried to say this word before, but I'm going to, give it another shot. Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray, which is Wiradjuri for River of Dreams, and that is a book which has traditional language on the cover, the first time in a commercial fiction. As I say, I think I've mentioned this before, but now I've finished reading it and I've left a book review, so we'll put that on the end of this episode.
Awesome.
And you'll be able to hear what I think about it. It's fantastic. I'm just going to give you the heads up there. And here's some news about second-hand books. So one of our listeners sent this in, thought it might be good to share with everybody. The World of Books, you can actually get secondhand books from the World of Books, and it's a reuse site, which is fantastic to buy something that is already there. So we're reducing carbon footprints, etc. So Authorshare is introducing the world's first reuse royalty initiative for writers. So authors will now be able to receive royalties on sales of used books, thanks to Authorshare. So this is this new scheme, and you can look it up, blog.worldofbooks.com, and have a bit of a look at that. So currently it's only from their site, but they really hope it's a World of Books and Book Barn, international websites. But what they do is that hope that other secondhand book sites will also start to have a think about that as well. So that's a really good thing, because I'm going to say I own up to buying a lot of secondhand books. I can't help myself. When I see them, I just have to get them, and I even, buy books before barcodes and those kind of things. So there you go. Blog.worldofbooks have a look, everybody. And if you're a reader, you might want to purchase some secondhand books from there. And if you're an author, you might want to have a look and register and see what happens there.
Yeah, what a cool idea. And
yeah,
I was just thinking, obviously my tinfoil hat comes on again for a bit of fun. But with, with textbooks and how, like, I know, it was kind of that way when I was at uni, but I read it's pretty similar still today, where a lot of the times they really not push you, but suggest you buy the latest version of a particular textbook because it's been updated and has much more relevant information. And it's usually, of course, to help the authors who usually, well, not all usually, but sometimes running the classes. Yes. And this may prevent that, because now if they get royalties from the sale of the secondhand textbook, then it eliminates the need to always bring up updated ones to try and maintain that cash flow.
Yeah.
So it could really work. But otherwise, what a cool idea.
It is a cool idea.
Yeah.
And I do have just one more thing, some news about one of our own Indigenous authors, and I call him our own because he was our very first podcast, delightful young man by the name of Gary Lonsborough, and congratulations to him because he has made the shortlist for the Readings YA Book Prize 2021. So that's fantastic. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, there are half a dozen on that shortlist. So he's in really good company. So we've got our fingers crossed that Gary, really, it doesn't matter. He's there. Lots of people are reading his stories, and there's lots of great, I guess, momentum around his story and lots of own voices. And that kind of fits in with the interview that we've got later, but also with the news, but it's website news. So I'm going to pass over the exciting website news. Do you want to tell us the new books that we're going to have, and we'll be able to see some additional Indigenous authors?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, a huge thank you to Wild Dingo Press, who have so graciously and kindly allowed us to start to bring across a lot of their awesome titles to be listed on the Australian Book Lovers website, which means, a great opportunity for all of our book lovers out there when they visit the website. Our Indigenous collection is going to grow very quickly. So it's going to be a really good opportunity to have a look at some great Indigenous authors. Now, of course, Indigenous author does not necessarily pigeonhole anything that they're writing.
No, all genres, all sorts of books.
Absolutely, yes. So, but yes, absolutely. So we'll slowly be bringing across a lot of those titles, which is fantastic. And again, huge shout out and thanks to Wild Dingo Press.
And their tagline, sorry, I just wanted to mention their tagline is books that stand their ground. And that's fantastic. So I first had a bit of a look at them. So I thought, we really need some more non-fiction books because, we want to encourage people like yourself who read a lot of non-fiction.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an addict on them at the moment.
Yeah, following the trail. And they've got some fantastic books there. Not all of them are non-fiction, of course. And also the reason I got into it is that there was a really brilliant series that they've got for younger readers, which is around the STEM stars, Aussie STEM stars.
Yes.
And which is fantastic. And so one of their STEM stars is, of course, the lovely Professor Fiona Wood, who I did some work with in WA when we're doing wound management and burns and all those kind of things. So that's the long story of how we got to Wild Dingo Press. And when we approached them, they said, yep, sounds good. So we're working with them.
Yeah, and it's just such a great relationship to be able to build because obviously Wild Dingo Press are a fantastic company and they're doing, gangbuster stuff for their authors, but allowing us to list their titles on the Australian Book Lovers also helps us to make a greater experience for book lovers out there because it's a kind of a one-stop shop, which is obviously our goal. It's become the Australia's premier one-stop shop where you can find, explore a huge library, of course, all by great Australian and Indigenous authors. So yes, definitely a little bit of relationship, I guess is so it's a beautiful thing.
Because we're happy to work with small press or large press or self-publishers. So I should actually mention that STEM is of course, the curriculum-based idea of educating students about science, technology, engineering and maths. So just in case anybody didn't know what STEM was, you haven't had children at school for a while or you've missed those bits and pieces. So,
Yeah, and I think half of our audience just went, oh, God. And the other went,
yeah, bring it on.
You either love math or you don't.
Yeah, there you go. So that's
and,
fantastic.
well, love or hate it, I don't think anyone truly understands it, but nonetheless.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
So that's lovely that we've got, because we've got Dead Set Press, we've had some good relationships with them. We've got lots of their books on the side.
Indeed.
And now Wild Dingo. So we'll gradually, approach and work through the other people. Yep.
Yes,
good.
yes. The library will continue to grow, absolutely.
It will.
And speaking of the library, I once again would like to take the opportunity in this new segment to spotlight a few of the fantastic reads we've got on the website. So for all of our book lovers out there, if something pricks your ears up and it sounds like your jam, then definitely head on and have a look. So I thought I would start with something from our fantasy selection. And this is a book titled The Age of Heroes. And that's by author Scott J. Robinson. Now, the Age of Heroes description reads as the following. Rourke is one of the great heroes. He has travelled the world for 40 years, hunting exotic creatures, battling magic and fighting evil wherever he found it. But he has been fighting mostly mundane battles since Prince Weaver outlawed magic. And with no great deeds left to be done, Rourke is afraid he'll soon be the old man in the corner of the tavern, dreaming of the good old days and telling tales for anyone who will buy him a drink. But when a huge Walden wolf is spied from the walls of Catamood for the first time in a decade, Rourke is the man the city looks to once more. He'll save them. He always has. Rourke will fight to ensure the Age of Heroes doesn't slip away into history. But what if the good old days aren't quite as good as he remembers? Now, that was The Age of Heroes by fantasy author Scott J. Robinson. And, of course, no prizes for guessing where you find it under our wonderful fantasy genre with our groovy Kookaburra.
Yes. Who's soon to be named.
Yes, absolutely. Something that possibly the next podcast will be announcing that.
Yes.
Yes. Now, you mentioned nonfiction earlier, Veronica, and I thought this is a very timely title. It's one of our brand new listings on the website, but it's also, I think, for reasons good or bad, is a quite timely title and subject matter for probably, more for Victorian than anything, but in general. So it is titled Simple Activities for Toddlers. And this by author Lisa Forsyth. And again, that's found under our non-fiction genre. So the description is, do you find yourself repeating the same activities with your toddler? And are you looking for new innovative ideas on how to keep them amused whilst making learning fun? If so, Lisa and Thomas have lots of great ideas to help you. The activities in this book are of high educational quality that maximizes the best use of your time, resources, and space. These play-based activities help your child thrive and ensures that they get a head start in life. All the activities have been toddler approved or field tested by none other than Thomas. Now, Lisa Forsyth has over 15 years of experience as a teacher across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Since becoming a mother to Thomas, she has focused her time on developing simple activities that develop foundational skills toddlers need to learn before engaging with more complex concepts and understandings. So this is a practical guide for parents that creates opportunities to bond with your child and make beautiful lifelong memories. So that's Simple Activities for Toddlers by Lisa Forsyth, which you'll find in our non-fiction genre. And so if you are, find yourself in lockdown at any point and with a toddler, maybe it's a great opportunity to try something different, see if there's some really cool activities in there that maybe you didn't think of or that can utilize the space and the, the odds and ends that you've got floating around.
Very timely for Victoria.
Yes. But now I would like to spotlight a title from our Aussie Tales selection, which of course is our wonderful Echidna in Thongs. And this title is called Mayday Mine, and it's by author Verity Croker. Now, Mayday Mine reads as follows. Life in a small mining town can be like living in a fishbowl, where everyone knows everyone else's business. 15-year-old Jodie's mother wants her father to quit his binge drinking and his dangerous job at the mine, even more so after a collapse leaves 2 miners dead and 3 trapped deep underground. As tensions escalate both at home and around the town, Jodie seeks comfort with her friends, but soon faces a double betrayal. As Jodie struggles to gain autonomy over her life, she begins to discover the person she really is. But with everything around her spiralling out of control, it may not be the right time to let her family, friends, and ultimately the whole town know, no matter how much she wants to. So, it's a bit of an intriguing story there to unravel. Mayday Mine by Verity Croker, again, can be found under our Aussie Tales.
Very good. I like
Now-
the spotlights. Enjoying those.
Yeah, so there's some cool tales out there, definitely.
yeah.
So now this one sounds very intriguing, and this one is actually covers, two genres. It's a title called Black Diamonds by author Kim Kelly, who's a very prolific writer and has quite a few titles listed on the Australian Book Lovers website. This can be found under both our historical fiction genre as well as our Aussie tales. And Black Diamonds reads as follows. It's 1914, and the coal town of Lithgow is booming. Daniel Ackerman is a serious young man, a miner, a socialist, and a German. Francine Connolly is the bourgeois, Irish Catholic, too good for this place daughter of one of the mine owners. When a tragic accident forces them together, this class-crossed pair fall in love despite themselves. Before the signatures on their marriage certificate are dry, though, war erupts, and a much more terrifying obstacle confronts them. Against his principles, but driven by a sense of solidarity, Daniel enlists. Francine, horrified, has no choice but to watch him go. Thrown into a daunting new world of separation and grief, they learn things about each other that they may never have known in more certain times. Hard lessons about heroism, sacrifice, and the thin line between bravery and stupidity. Told with freshness, verve, and wit, Black Diamonds is the tale of a fierce young nation, Australia, and two fierce hearts who dare to discover what courage really means. And a quote from Australian Women's Weekly for Black Diamonds reads, "This is the story of a love greatly tested and of the resilience of ordinary Australians sucked into a pointless war by propaganda. It's enough to turn you into a war protester." So I say run out and grab it now then. Absolutely. So once again, that's Black Diamonds by Kim Kelly under both our historical fiction and Aussie tales. And once you do scroll through there, you'll see a bunch of fantastic titles from Kim.
Fantastic.
And one more, Veronica, and I think this is one that's right up your alley because I think you've done a review of this one, but I thought we'd do a bit of a spotlight, and that is City of Whispers, an Imperial Assassin book one by Indigenous author Kat Powers.
Yes.
And obviously this can be found, but this City of Whispers can be found under our Indigenous listing genre. And again, this is book one of the Imperial Assassin series. So City of Whispers.
I can't wait for book two.
Is it out yet? No, it's not yet out.
Not yet. No, I know she's working on it because there's a little back and forth on Twitter and Instagram, and I know she's working on it. But she's got a fascinating background. She's an archaeologist as well, so she's often out and about, through the back of South Australia and Central Australia, looking at archaeological digs and particularly also, Aboriginal cultural items as well. So she's got her hands full doing lots of things. But I'd like her just to stay home and finish writing book two for me.
Well, there you go, Kat. If you are listening, you've got definite sales waiting. Yeah. So now City of Whispers reads as a disgraced assassin, a sinister plot. Will her one shot at redemption send her to the grave? Dani Karam is furious. Wrongly expelled from the Imperial Assassins, the snarky killer is forced into a lowly, unranked position in a remote desert colony, working with a guy who's clearly damaged goods. And when they barely survive an attack on what should have been a routine assignment, she fears clearing her name could cost her life. Struggling to navigate a land where she's the only person who can't wield magic, things get worse when she receives a death threat and her unwanted partner vanishes. But when the clues lead to a violent cult, Dani finds herself in a race against time to stop a bloodbath that will consume thousands of innocent lives. Can she expose a deadly conspiracy before it causes a massacre? City of Whispers is the thrilling first book in the Imperial Assassin Fantasy Adventure series. If you like kick-ass heroines, high-octane action, and off-the-charts snark, then you'll love Kat Powers' gritty tale. And that is City of Whispers, Imperial Assassin Book 1 by Kat Powers, and that can be found under our fantasy genre as well as our Indigenous genres. And that sounds so good. I do love me a mysterious cult with dangerous simmerings in remote locations.
Yeah,
sounds fascinating.
Lots of action, lots of plots within plots, and the Dani Karim, the protagonist, the main character, is fantastic. I just loved her. Really good. Yeah. Woo.
So there you go, dear listeners. If you are looking for a new book and one of those stories has perked your interest, please do jump on to the Australian Book Lovers website and flick through our genres. locate some of these amazing books where you can click on learn more and get a little bit more of an in-depth description, as well as learn a little bit about the author. And of course, if it is going to be your jam, there's a button there. You can grab a copy straight away from wherever the author has nominated. And not only are you going to get a huge spark to your imagination, but you'll also be supporting some fantastic Australian authors.
Yeah,
and that is my news. But I understand that our news segment today is going to, we're about to move to a very special little edition today. Is that right?
We are. But there's one little thing that I do want to say. Do you remember the last episode we were talking about Gothic literature and about Australian Gothic, and then particularly about Tasmanian Gothic? Well, Zane Pinner, who is on Twitter, who popped up in my feed with hashtags Tasmanian Gothic, Fiction Tasmania. He is at the Twilight Zane, Zane.
Oh, nice.
I thought, how good is that? So I said, hey, you need to listen to our last podcast. And so ever so kindly, he has said it looks fantastic. He's definitely going to have a little bit of a listen. So there you go. The amazing connections that come up. Lots of people are on Twitter at the moment about Pit Mad, which will be over by the time the episode comes. But it's the opportunity to pitch a tweet-length story book work to agents. So the agents will get on and they'll have a look at, hashtag PicMad, and if they're looking for Gothic fiction, they'll go hashtag Gothic. If they're looking for YA, hashtag YA, and then it will show them all of the pitches that come up. So I think you're allowed to pitch once an hour or 3 times over the 8 hours or something. Anyway, there are rules. Authors can have a look. But if you're a reader and you want to have a look and see what some potential upcoming books are, jump onto Twitter and have a look at PitchMad. Now, please, if you do know, don't like it unless you are an agent. Just retweet or comment, and that helps the algorithm to recognise and push it to the top. But there you go.
Well, I just thought a great little pitch. Politician tells truth, goes swimming, doesn't make it to dinner.
Yeah, no, you want people will say, no, that'll never sell. But no, all right. So there you go. So that was a nice connection with Zane.
Absolutely, the old synchronicity at work. Thank you, universe. There is a little bit of magic hidden in there.
Indeed. But as you say, we do have, and we've been saying to people, please let us know what you thought of the writing festivals. So I am really thrilled to be able to say that we have one of our authors again, Kevin Klehr. And
legendary author.
A legendary author, indeed. Kevin was one of the organisers for the Icarus Conference, and we did some help with some advertising and those kind of things a little while back. So we caught up with Kevin for a quick chat about what he thought. So here you go. And I'd like to welcome to the podcast Kevin Klehr. So Kevin, as you will know, is one of our authors who was on an earlier podcast all about his own books. But Kevin is also a big contributor to the LGBTQI plus community, and he has been an organizer, I say that, in inverted commas, for the Icarus Conference. So Kevin, tell us all about the Icarus Conference. Tell us about the organising. What were the best things?
Sure.
Where you go.
Look, it was interesting because in the end, there was 6 of us organising. There was Gillian in New Zealand, there was me, there was Ava in Romania, there was Marvin in the US, and there was Jeff in the UK. And there was also Glenn in Northern Ireland, who was responsible for all the little pictures of our mascot, Alex Q Star, the cat that you see all over the place.
Yep.
And basically, when the others started this, and they were having meetings in the morning, when it would have been the middle of the night for me on Monday morning.
Yep.
So I couldn't join, but I'd read the minutes of the meeting and see if there was anything left for me to do, etc. And then they kept making the meeting later and later, to the point where it was 6 a.m. Monday morning Sydney time. So I thought, they've gone through all this trouble. Poor Ava's staying awake till close to midnight in Romania because they keep moving this to try to get everyone involved.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'd better set the alarm and join the meetings. So I eventually did. And then when daylight saving finished in the southern hemisphere but started in the northern hemisphere, and we were down to the last couple of months of organising this event, the meetings would start Sydney time 5 a.m. Monday morning. So I'd have broken sleep that night. The alarm was set for 10 to. Well, I'd be out on the 10 to 5, I should say. I'd be out on the balcony so I wouldn't disturb anyone in the apartment or my husband in the apartment. Rugged up with headphones with my Madonna mic and helping organise. I ended up doing a lot of the social media stuff. But basically what Icarus was, we did an online book conference which streamed live. It started Sydney time 2 a.m. On Mother's Day. And even though I took sleeping tablets that night, because my first appearance wasn't until 7 a.m., I still woke up close, I think at 20 past 1, and then, got up to see if this thing actually worked, if it was streaming live on YouTube. There was 2 sessions at any one time. I just wanted to make sure it all worked, and it all worked beautifully. And I think I finally got to sleep probably close to 5, and then was deep dream sleep when the alarm went off. It's like, I've got to be up. My first appearance is at 7. I've got to be there.
So a truly international event then, but sounds like it got off to a good start.
Yeah. We had indie authors and a couple of with major publishers from all over the world, from the UK, from Europe. It did go off well, and we had some really interesting sessions. Like if anyone wants to watch any of the sessions, the best way to do it is to go to icarusbookcon.com, which is spelled IQARUS, bookcon.com, and you just hit the little YouTube link. And you'll see all the sessions we had. And one of the best sessions, actually, which I watched back later, was social media marketing. It's outside the box. It has several people who, market for other people on social media or have their own specialist social media that they have an audience for. And one of the hardest things that they found, like when you watch it back, is trying to outguess the algorithms every time they change. Yes.
As if it isn't hard enough, they will change them on all the different platforms at all different times, and it's like just when you thought you had it, no.
Exactly, and suddenly you go back out to the same 20 people when you really want to reach hundreds and thousands of people because I sometimes teach media, I tell students, sometimes you have to treat Facebook and especially Facebook like it's MySpace. Go and find the pages of the people you want to that you want to be seen in their feeds and start communicating with them. But don't say, please come and look at me, but start liking, start commenting,
and eventually be a part of the community.
And then you will go back into their feeds. But it's a frustrating way to do it. Another highlight of this event, I hosted the Romance Readings Part 1.
Right.
And that features one New Zealander and some other Australians, including Rebecca Langham, whose romance... Yes, you know Rebecca well. Her romance author pen name is Cara Ripley. So if you're looking for that session, on the thumbnail it says Kara Ripley. She
Right.
writes her dystopian stuff as Rebecca, her romance stuff as Kara. And her kids were with her the whole time. They were hugging her while she was talking to the laptop, etc. And in the reading she did, she had to drop the F-bomb. And as soon as she drops it, she turns around to her daughter and says, "Don't you ever use that word. Don't you ever use that word." And then comes back and continues reading. It's fabulous. It's fabulous.
Oh, that's a classic. That's very good. Yeah. So how many people did you have, I guess, online at any one time? I'm sure it varied over the sessions, but what was your average attendance?
Watching or as part of the panels?
Either or.
I don't know how many were watching at any one time. I've been looking at the views since, which sessions have been most popular, etc. One good thing with the platform we used, it also gave us the comments back from YouTube. We didn't have to keep an eye on YouTube.
Nice.
We used Melon.
Right.
Which sets itself up as a little TV studio as your guests come in and you set them up and pick a background and you have your own like personal feed so you can all talk to each other if you need to. But it also brings you the comments from YouTube and you can use Melon to comment back and then the audience sees it on their YouTube.
Right, so it's live streaming on YouTube
live streaming
Melon.
Via Melon.
Yep.
Yeah, it also live streams to Facebook, but I didn't want to try to set that up as well. So like one place is enough. They can watch it there.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many people watched while the sessions were going on, but I've noticed the numbers going up for the past live streams at the Icarus YouTube channel for certain sessions, like not your typical fantasy readings. I'm looking today, when we're recording this, the 2nd of June, and 71 views, which is not bad. Romance readings part 1, 90 views. So they're all there. They're interesting.
Still getting people to check it out. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what you want.
So will the conference meet again?
We're talking about it. There's a few other people who want to be involved this time and help us. One of them's an author who joined us for the session about research, because he also does a lot of research in his job, and he really wants to be part of this next year. Whether it happens or not, who knows? Yeah. It'd be good to know. It would become and seeing that we've done the first one, we've ironed out all the bugs and all the stress. Oh yeah, God, the stress leading up to it was because part of my stress for waking up at 2 o'clock to see if this thing went live is I'm the one that suggested Melon, using melons. Okay. So I had all these
feeling a little accountability there. Yes,
exactly. And when I got up and saw, it's all working. The 2 streams are happening live at any one time. It's all working. But even leading up to it, like suddenly all our reputations are at stake. We've got people involved who are going to be featured. We're promoting this. We got people to register so that they could win prizes by being part of the scavenger hunt. Yes. We had all our guests writing guest blogs to help us with social media leading up to the event. There a lot of stuff happened. So if it didn't go right on the day, all our faces were all over different social media platforms saying, hey, put your eyes here on the day, Yeah,
no, that's good. And as you say, now that most of the bugs are out, second time around is so much easier.
Yeah, we know what to do next time. We know where we fell short the first time around. We know what worked. We know how to shortcut it next time.
Yeah. And certainly I recently attended the online conference, Flights of Foundry, which was the Dream Foundry, which was fantastic. All speculative fiction, of course, my fave. Yep. It was 24 hours, which was brilliant because then they put on panels that had Aussies and Kiwis in it, and also some South American authors, etc., in our time zone. So at any time of the day you could go on and there would be something happening, which is, look, silver linings for COVID. Not a lot of conferences would necessarily have thought about doing their conferences either for 24 hours or online. So yeah, I'm going, yay, let's call that a winner.
I think that's a winner because even in the the latter part of this, it was pretty much Gillian in New Zealand and myself hosting with our American and our Canadians still online, but Ava stayed up till 5 a.m. Romanian time just to still be part of this. And we were saying, go to bed, don't be part of the later sessions, but Ava wanted to be part of the whole thing.
What was happening? Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we will keep an eye out and let us know when and if the next one's going on. But
definitely,
as a sucker for punishment, you've got another conference that you're involved in.
Not quite a conference,
no?
and I'm not the organizer, thankfully. There's this great new little group called the Rainbow Literary Society Australia.
Right.
They've done what they're trying to do is do author reading nights. And they've successfully done 2 already. The last one was just featured me and Rebecca. But this time around on June the 19th at 3 o'clock at the Stonewall Hotel in Sydney, they're featuring, hold on, I don't have the poster in front of me. They're featuring, obviously me, Rebecca Langham, a wonderful author named Nigel Bartlett, who has a really good, wonderful book he released a couple of years ago through Random House called King of the Road, which is a thriller about a young gay man who, while he's looking after his nephew goes missing and he goes on the road to find him. There's also a wonderful author named KJ who I've just discovered because I asked her to be part of the romance reading group. Her stuff is lovely. If you get a chance even to look at the Icarus Romance Part 1 session and listen to KJ's readings, it is lovely. And silly me, I've forgotten the name of the other person who's on our session that day. Aren't I awful? Aren't I awful? I'm going to quickly find it because just before our meeting, I had 2 unplanned guests show up at my place.
Of course.
and I was going to have this all set up. Actually, it's on the front page of my website. The other one is S.R. Silcox, who I know nothing about.
Yep.
She's also from Melbourne. SR and KJ will be here from Melbourne for the event. But the thing is, they're trying to do more events.
Will they be here? We've just gone into another week of lockdown. So
I know.
Did you say the 19th of June?
19th of June in Sydney.
Yeah. It could be okay.
In October, they're planning one in Melbourne. The date is not confirmed yet. I do know it's not the first weekend of October because I had to check because Warren and I have to be at a wedding in Brisbane that weekend.
Right.
But they are confirming one. They're hoping to do one in Perth.
Right.
And they're hoping to grow this event.
Tell us a little bit about how the event works, if you would.
Oh, look, basically it's free, but they do put an Eventbrite link for people to be part of it. It's run by Rachel Byrne, who is in Melbourne, and Sarah and I think Victoria's in Sydney as well. And there's also director Shane, who I think is also based in Sydney. But they're keen. They're keen to start promoting queer writing in Australia to have these events because, in the US there are heaps of these events. In places with more population, there are heaps of these events.
Yes.
But they've got a passion for this writing, so they're putting on these events. They're selling our books on our behalf at these events.
Right. Yeah.
And like I said, so if you want to come to the one in Sydney on the 19th of June, type in the rainbowliterarysociety.com, and there is a link, if I'm right. I don't want to strew people astray. Hold on. Meet the team about home. Is it on the homepage? It's on the homepage, and the Sydney event doesn't link, but look, just go to my website. It's on the front page. The links are there. Kevin Klehr.com. And no doubt, I'm definitely going to be part of the Melbourne event, and I'll update the front page of my web page with all the links for the Melbourne event as well.
Excellent. Will you be reading from one of your published books, or have you got something unpublished that you're going to share? By October, my newest book, The Midnight Man, will be released. That gets released on August 17. Fantastic. And it's a wonderful, urban fantasy, magic realism, whatever you want to call it, about an unhappy 49-year-old man named Stan, who is in a failed relationship, has an overbearing mother, hates his job, and in his dreams, he meets a 21-year-old named Asher, who takes him on dreamtime adventures, but also gives him the gift of being an extra 5 years younger every time they meet. Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, so by the time he gets Stan in his dreams is in his 20s, a relationship develops between Asher and him. But that's not the main focus. It's not a romance. It's about Stan being challenged in his dreamtime adventures with Asher to strengthen his own character, so that he can start reevaluating his life and making changes in his life to be happier. Fantastic. Or as my editor, when she gave me the yes, we do want to publish this. Yep. I'll send you the contract. She actually encapsulated and said, this is actually a book about growing older. And I never thought about it like that, but it is. It's a book about growing older, and if you're not happy with where you are, how do you change? What do you have to change within yourself to move forward? Very good. Yeah. But at the Sydney event, I'll be reading from my first novel, Drama Queens with Love Scenes. Okay. Yeah. Very good. All right. Kevin Klehr, thank you so much for checking in. Author, conference organizer, event reader, fantastic contributor to the writing community. Thank you so much. Thanks, Veronica. Thank you so much. All right. Cheers then. Bye. So, Kevin Klehr, thank you so much for that fabulous update on the Icarus Conference. And how about that, the Rainbow Literary Society of Australia? I love it. And they'll be bringing a reading to a capital city near you ever so soon. Probably not Melbourne. Oh, Melbourne's in October, I think. So that works well. So yeah, keep your eye out for that. All those readers who like audiobooks, this could also be an in real life audiobook. Yes, there you go. A 3D audiobook. No, 4D. Yeah, 4D. But no, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. That is awesome, and definitely maintains your legendary status. Yes, so, he is. And I think I'm hoping that we'll be hearing from you again real soon. So definitely, fingers crossed, dear listeners, that won't be the last time we hear from the awesome Kevin. And speaking of legends, you had a brilliant interview with Ej Dawson, and I am so jealous that you got to chat to her. That was fantastic. I've read some of Ej's work, but super surprise for people after the interview, but we won't say it yet. I'm going to let you lead us into the interview. Well, yes, indeed. So it was an absolute pleasure talking with author Ej Dawson. Just the personality that just crackled through my headphones, and energy that just popped across the computer, and what an amazing conversation, and covered so much ground. And Ej, was just
so clear and giving us such great insights into, you know, what inspires her to write and you know, the themes and those elements of writing and, you know, life in general that are both important to her and form, you know, a lot of her passion. So it was awesome. So yes, I do agree that you're probably a little bit jealous because it was a fantastic one. No, all of our authors are fantastic, and that is the joy, because yes, we, you know, we each get to interview different people, but the best part is at the end of the day, we all get to enjoy the interview together. And so,
yes,
yeah, today, for readers that aren't aware of some of Ej Dawson's work, she has a trilogy of books, which currently you'll be able to find under our science fiction genre. They're at the top of the listing, so very easy to find. And it is the Queen of Spades book series, and it basically is made up of 3 titles. That is, title 1 is Awakening, title 2 is Darkening, and title 3 is Reckoning. So some very powerful words there, and definitely hints at some very powerful and very fast-paced stories and writing, and just a passion that really comes across as something, as a force to be reckoned with. So I might, before we go to the interview, I might quickly read just the description for book 1, just to give you an idea of the energy that is going to come through your fingertips when you hold a copy of this. So Ej Dawson, Awakening, Queen of Spades, book 1. Ayla is a villain with a gift that allows her to see when anyone will die. She's remorseless in her profession as the perfect assassin. When she wakes up in a cryo tank 3,000 years in the future and no idea how she came to be there, all that matters is survival. Rescued by Leith and the crew of the Nuria, Ayla discovers a far-evolved world of spaceships and galactic colonization. But everything comes with a price. And though Ayla is no princess locked in an icy tower, she still has to pay for the rescue she didn't know she needed. Given over to Leith, a darkly handsome man who reads Ayla far easier than she'd like, they must work together if Ayla is to repay her debt. As the pair come to learn how dangerous one another are, so too grows a lustful bond that comes with rules of its own. Fighting to learn why she was frozen, Ayla's dragged into Leith's past, with a criminal organisation seeking to take over this sector of the galaxy. In order to survive, Leith will need Ayla's help, but Ayla doesn't know if she's willing to pay what it will cost her. So there we go. That's book 1, Awakening of the Queen of Spades trilogy.
It's really good.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, and before we jump to the interview, which is just spectacular fun, it gave me a little bit of thought, because I was really impressed with the little bit of reading I've done of Ej's work and how fast it gets to the point. There's a pacing there that is just
such good action writing. Yeah.
And something I'm very jealous of, to say the least. And it got me thinking a little bit of, you know, how pace works, or is there a definitive line that differentiates between one pace and another? And I thought, science fiction, and then I thought, space operas, and you know, they feel like they're 2 different things. They feel to me 2 different pacings. I love a good space opera, but I love a good sci-fi as well. And I thought, is there a difference? And so just quick little bit of research I did, and I found one description as far as where space operas fit in either a genre or subgenre. It's essentially considered a subgenre. So what I've read is, so when it comes to space operas, science fiction is the parent genre, space opera is a subgenre, specifically targeting scientifically advanced future societies built around amazing technologies, humanity spread out through the galaxy or even multiple galaxies. Some space opera include alien life forms, but many early ones don't. There are often fantastic abilities associated with space operas in addition to technology, including psychic prowess, advanced mental powers, or unexplained abilities, such as, for example, Star Wars Force powers.
Yes.
And a historical dictionary of science fiction defines space opera as a subgenre of science fiction which uses stock characters and settings, especially those of Westerns, translated into outer space. A genre of science fiction in which the action spans across a galaxy or galaxies. A work of these genres regarded as being, this is the weird part, of an unsophisticated or cliched type.
Yeah.
Which I think is hilarious, considering space operas can be mind-bogglingly complex.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts? Do you think space operas carry a different pace than, say, science fiction action?
Well, I think, it's going to depend on your author, and it's going to depend on the story, because people don't stick to the genre classifications. People who try and classify them into one or the other, we need to do that as authors to make sure that we're getting to the right readers. But looking at the latest Kalytics report, thank you, Alex Duden. Please, everybody, have a look at his work. There are so many subgenres of science fiction. So you've got, as well as space opera, you've got steampunk, time travel, space exploration, post-apocalyptic, metaphysical and visionary, hard science fiction, genetic engineering, galactic empire, first contact, dystopian, colonization, alternative history, alien invasion, adventure. You've then got, you can look it up from a sort of a military science fiction. Some of the suspense horror end up in sci-fi, travel, science fiction, romance science fiction, and just plain action adventure science fiction. So it's so difficult to say what fits in there. But in the olden days, there was a kind of a hierarchy, kind of a poo-poo, this is just space opera, it's kind of, glorified romance, and all they've done is change the setting from, as you say, the Westerns, and stuck it in space. But I don't think that does it gives no credence to the skill and the imagination of people who write in that genre or subgenre, because, as you say, they can be complex. The characters can still go through incredible arcs as they develop or devolve or all those kind of things. But for me, I love that it sets things in, you get the chance to set it into universes that are completely different, change the rules of physics, although some science fiction people don't like you to do that. They like saying that doesn't work. But you'll often get, readers arguing with authors about made up science fiction, saying that science wouldn't work. So science fiction tends to have an element of kind of that hard science there, or based on one of the sciences, like genetic engineering based on, biology and those kind of things. So I don't like that definition.
No, the historical dictionary science fiction definition. No, I think that's a historical definition.
Yes,
possibly. But yeah, I mean, look, not Robert M. Pissick, Peter F. Hamilton's Night Dawn trilogy, which begins with reality dysfunction. There's nothing unsophisticated or cliched about that. I mean, you've got wormholes, you've got breaks in the fabric of space, you've got Hitler, you've got Al Capone, you've got colonization, you have spaceship technology that actually gives birth and therefore, has the ability to speak telekinetic or mentally, I guess. I don't know what's the correct term. But anyway, so much there. So, but it was interesting that and it came up quite a few times just doing a bit of research, and you mentioned yourself in the essence of basically Western set in space. And I thought, well, that's not a bad thing. I mean, it doesn't matter where we set anything. If it's got humans in it, it's a human tale, isn't it, really? And I was thinking,
yes, that is exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, okay, Westerns in space. So what is it? It's about exploring unknown frontiers, and then, depending on your discovery, having to learn the art of communication, and also the art of finding common ground with other races or civilizations. That is just such a fantastic story to tell and lesson to learn no matter what. Because obviously we got a very disjointed world at the moment. So I think maybe space opera, I'm thinking it should be a subject in school, definitely, because we got to be able to get together as a few countries on this planet, let alone when we're talking about galactic organizations and interplanetary.
We have got a lot of work to do. I'm just currently rereading a really old science fiction, E. Doc Smith's Lensman series, starting with Triplanetary, which I think is 6 or 7 books, 7 small books. And while it's classic, you can see that it has absolutely dated. But even, back then they were trying to look at humanity as a kind of global patrol. I can't remember what, the Galactic Patrol, I think it is. I've only just started reading again. I am struggling with some of the dialogue because I'm thinking, oh man, I didn't realise how much we'd moved on. I think these were written in the 80s. One thing I do want to mention though is that when I was looking at the Kalytics report, which does just look at Amazon, but in the top 40 sellers on Amazon, 8 of them are self-published. So I thought that was really interesting. And there's 1 in the top 10 and 3 in the top 15. So 4 in the top 20. So, you know, they're right up there. And science fiction is still a very high selling genre to write in. So don't stop. Keep reading and keep writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, that's just the beautiful thing about what is today, what would have been science fiction for many people 100, 200 years ago. We're living in their science fiction future world. And that means that if you've got a tale to tell, write it. And if you want to get it out to the world, get it out to the world. There's nothing stopping you. Any tale can be told. And that's a beautiful thing, because it means, you know, this huge, and the diversity of tales is just going to increase, and the experiences that we're going to be able to live through it or learn from, and tales, you know, woven from life experience. It's just endless out there. So, and it's no longer guided or manipulated by, you know, I guess, not manipulated, but the menu is no longer dictated by one restaurant. Put it that way. It's anything you can think about eating, you'll be able to go out and get. So, by all means. But nonetheless, speaking of, you know, a fantastic futuristic science fiction, space opera, amazing tales ready to ignite your imagination, let us now jump to the fabulous, the fun, the futuristic, and the wonderfully warm and always entertaining Ej Dawson for her interview with the Australian Book Lovers. Ej Dawson, thank you so much for doing us the honour of joining the Australian Book Lovers podcast today. How are you?
I'm very well, Darren. Thank you very much for having me. It's absolutely delightful to be part of the podcast.
Oh, it's an absolute delight to have you. And I know we've been chatting a little bit beforehand, but I haven't mentioned that I'm quite excited to be chatting with you today, because, you know, you've got a huge library of work and obviously a lot of experience when it comes to putting words down on paper. And I understand you've been published here, self-published and traditionally published. So many things I wanted to have a chat with you about. But I guess the very first question, before we get right into the nitty-gritty aspects of writing and reading and all the fun stuff, is how has 2021 been for you so far?
Honestly, not as bad as I know that everyone had really, really terrible years and it was absolutely crippling. But I actually, one of the most interesting things about me, so I'll be upfront, and I know that you're aware of this, but I actually have been diagnosed with Asperger's, which puts me on the autism spectrum. And one of the greatest things about this is it's enabled me to stay at home. And one of the things that often people with Asperger's do is they put on a mask to normalize and socialize because they don't necessarily have those skills. So one of the most exciting things that I've actually been able to do is become more confident in myself as a neurodiverse person so that I can actually openly talk about it today. So while it definitely had its ups and downs, I've taken a lot of value out of the time that it's given me to be better identified with myself.
Oh, that's really good to hear. And I mean, I think it's important that we all at some point, you know, especially after the previous year and the trials and tribulations have brought, there does come a point where I think it's so, you know, important and useful to try and look for those elements that can be a positive, can be that diamond out of the dirt, you know, and find something that we can carry with from these experiences with the pandemic and the shifts in all of our daily lives, something that we can carry as a positive in our lives moving forward. So it sounds like you've managed to do that in a beautiful way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And there's absolutely negative things. Like, I'll be honest, I'll throw in a negative there just to give you an idea. We actually had a bit of a shower issue in our house and we're renting. And so we're actually taking baths for most of the year that we didn't have to worry our landlord about having the pandemic and financial stresses that everyone was under. We got to shower just last week and I can't tell you how thrilling it's been. So I think everybody had their little pros and cons out of 2020. And I think that 2021 is shaping up to be a little bit the same, like where a lot of us are still working from home. A lot of us are still a bit nervous about these new sort of variations of the virus that are coming out. And I think it is so important that we all stay as safe as possible. But there's good and bad for everyone, and everyone's got different stories about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, no doubt you've had that unfortunate aspect of the bathtubs, but at the same time, you've been able to rediscover showers in a way many of us probably don't. And I have a sneaky suspicion you probably know every brand of bubble bath on the market.
I'm going to just nip that right in the bud and
No
say,
bubble baths?
no Epsom salts all the way. There was no deviation whatsoever. It did mean, though, that there was an amusing incident where I realised that I could just have a bath to relax, as opposed to sort of the Japanese style of bathing, which is what we adopted, which is where you sort of scrub yourself all over and then you relax in the bath. But I didn't really relax. I was just trying to get clean. So I've gone back to being able to relax. Like, actually sit there and have a bath and relax in the bath, glass of wine and a book, and just be very happy.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I've never been one to I'll sit in a bath and relax. I can't remember the last bath I've had, though it was a bit of an experience when I go to Japan. And if you do go to a bathhouse and, that you basically scrub yourself on a little chair first and hose yourself down and everything.
Well, that's why we did it, because both me and my husband have been to Japan at different times, funnily enough, because we really absolutely love the culture and the people, and we both got opportunities at different times. So when this happened with our shower, we just said to the landlord, look, we'll just adapt Japanese style bathing. So definitely a change and a convenience to be able to go back and shower, but I appreciate it a lot more having been without it.
Oh, well, there you go. Especially now that we're coming into winter in Victoria, the hot showers will be a blessing, a good little massage. But so you're talking about Japan. Suddenly, for a split second there, EJ, I was picturing myself in a Japanese bath with a TV watching Shogun, the old Shogun Assassin, with the baby in the cart or whatever it's called. Are you familiar with that one, the very old movies?
Look, I'll be perfectly frank. I don't know the movie that you're talking about, but I've read the book Shogun as a precursor to going to Japan. My mother scrambled on her bookshelf to find a book that was about Japan and Japanese culture, and she unfortunately pulled up Shogun. And I don't know if you actually read the novel, but it starts out with the Europeans being boiled alive, which was not a great thing for a 16-year-old to read.
No, I don't think it would be.
No, so it was and I did read it because it was an interesting, very westernized view of Japanese culture. But I was already very much enamored of it through watching a lot of anime and animated series and whatnot. And this is back in 1995 and 96. So it was when a lot of that was a lot less common than it is today.
Oh, that's a nice motorbike. Yeah, that's true. No, but as opposed to Shogun, as you mentioned, is probably a very heavy book. Now, the Shogun Assassin was, it's hard to describe, it wasn't quite a movie and it wasn't quite a series. It was kind of chopped up and made into both, but it's essentially about a father who walks the feudal Japan with his son, who's a baby, in a baby cart, but the baby cart is like all tricks to it, so I can whip out blades and swords, and so he was like a shogun, but I guess a ronin or a wandering mercenary who would help villages and stuff. But thinking of that, the Shogun Assassin and all the crazy antics of that assassin, of course, leads me into one of the reasons that we're so happy to be chatting with you today in regards to your Awakening series, which is about an assassin, though probably a lot different to a father and son in Japan. Now, so I just thought maybe for our readers out there, let them know, and listeners, of course, listening to this podcast, you are the author of the Queen of Spades series, with Awakening being book 1, Darkening being book 2, and Reckoning being book 3. So essentially the Queen of Spades trilogy. Now, you've also written the Last Prophecy series, and I understand Behind the Veil. But drawing back to Awakening, which is book 1 of the Queen of Spades, I did start to read the opening chapter, and one thing that struck me straight away was how fast it moved. It was a cracking pace. So I guess there's 2 questions I have to open up our discussions about your writing, which reads so fantastic, and that is, what inspired an assassin for a character, and where did you develop that literary style of being able to have the moments just jump from the page and transition so fast and so grippingly?
So there's 2 different things that come about there. One is not necessarily a funny story. The other one is going to immediately indicate how much of a nerd I am to you.
Okay.
And I'll go on with the less fun one. I'll start
with
the less fun one. So I started writing the Last Prophecy series as a steampunk fantasy series about 7 years ago now. And I knew that I was it's a 21 book series that has started, and I actually am resuming it. Because my wonderful editor, Scott, has said that he can come back and help me out with it after I took a brief break from it. I told people about it and they said to me, but you're a woman, you could write romance and sell lots of books. And the kind of stare that I gave them would make, some rather droll memes, die in vain.
Yeah, they're probably warranted too there, those looks.
Yeah, no, it was not very flattering. And I wanted to write a story that was about a very powerful woman who didn't need a man, which a lot of stories about women are often, and in romance, often come about where there's this kind of need. And it's not every story, and definitely you do want a man or woman or someone, a partner in your life to share it with. But the idea that you could only sell books if it was romantic was incredibly informative. So I wanted to write a story that was romance, but that's not what its sellability was. So immediately, of course, you turn to the next thing that sells, which is violence.
Oddly enough, but yeah, no argument from me.
Well, if you do tend to look at the two top categories, I was listening to, I think it was your podcast, in fact, that mentioned that the two top selling categories as romance and mystery and crime and things. So I was looking at those two different things, but I also knew that wasn't really my ballpark at the time. So I came up with this idea of a woman who displaced out of time, who knew when everyone was going to die, but because of the way that everybody treated her throughout her life as some sort of curse, she ends up as quite indifferent and quite unapproachable and very inclined to contact or lean on other people. And that's the persona that I really started with. If you read the opening pages, she's an incredibly aggressive character. She jumps out of this 3,000-year cryo fleet firing, and there's no stopping her. And watching her develop into a person who could fall in love throughout the trilogy, because she does fall in love, and there's no hiding that she falls, that across the trilogy she does develop a very strong connection to Leith. That there was all part of herself and defining who she was and what she actually wanted out of life. And she originally just thought it was just to be this curse, which she calls a gift all the time. And I internally think of it as a curse to alter the way that I perceive her actions in the story, which then brings me around to why is it so fast paced? And one of the reasons is that I actually spend a lot of my time and have for many, many years running role-playing games. And one of the things that you cannot do in a role-playing game is you cannot slow the pace down. You have to keep going. You have anywhere between 3 and 6 people sitting in front of you who are hanging off your every word, ready to tell you what they want to do about what is happening around them and the plot and everything that you're putting them in, regardless of the role-playing setting. So I quite often use the Cthulhu rulebook, which requires a lot of investigativism, and quite often your players will surprise you by being either incredibly clever or incredibly stupid, and you have to react on the CD or nothing in between. No, none of my players, nothing in between. If any of them listen to this, they'll murder me. But they do tend to, you do need to be able to have that seat of your pants ability to react to stuff. And I would sometimes use the techniques I use in role-playing in order to move through the script, which does give me that really, that high pace and that high tension and that unbreathability, which is the one criticism that I take from a lot of my stories that I'm trying to sort of bring back into the story, so that you don't have, the reader has moments to actually breathe and just absorb what's going on, as opposed to moment to moment to moment. But that first book is all action.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, you know, I write from a different approach, and I tend to go in slow. I like to, you know, explore everything: sight, sound, smells, textures, and then sort of frantically raise it and drop it back. So that's one approach. But then, you know, when I was reading the opening pages of Awakening, or the opening chapter, you know, I was just so jealous because it literally, you know, I mean, it is a cliche to say it jumped from the page. This really did jump from the page, and and not only that, you know, obviously it's hard to take your author hat off sometimes. And, you know, so as an author, I was just so gobsmacked by the, I guess, command you had of being able to move at that pace. Because look, sometimes you read stuff that's fast paced, but it's, want of a better word, it's a blur, because it doesn't give you any anchor points. Whereas I thought it was fascinating. It was such a refreshing opening to a book. So, and that's where I sort of wanted to know, or was wondering to myself, like whether that was a style that you consciously worked to develop, or whether it was something that had originally come naturally and that you've you've sharpened and made better. But so do you think it was the style that you've developed there? Do you think obviously it comes from some of the gaming side of things, but is it a style that is a natural fit for you, or is it something you had to work out?
I definitely think that it is a natural fit for me, but I also think that I can, to some extent, I do both. So I'm a very big believer in a slower book. So one of my favorite series is called Dampier, and it's by Barb and J.C. Hendy, and it is a much older series, but the book is basically a third of the way over before it really gets going. And so I think that when I'm writing fantasy, that I do tend to keep a fantasy audience in mind, so that it's much slower paced. There's much more gradual development. There's a sense of being able to slow down a little bit. So I spent a lot of time with my Last Prophecy series doing that. But for a sci-fi action, you are definitely expecting more, and I'm expecting more as a reader. So I played a lot of Mass Effect. I watched a lot of science fiction movies. Some of my favorite shows are Killjoys and Dark Matter. And I know that both of those have stopped. And if you haven't watched Killjoys and you do like sci-fi, I cannot recommend that series enough. But I think that when you are writing, you need to write for the audience who is going to be reading it in some regards, bearing in mind that you're not just catering them, you're catering yourself.
Yes.
If you're an active reader in these genres, then you're going to be writing to what you expect the genre to be. So my science fiction does tend to be quite twisty and quite high-paced and quite full-on, whereas I have other series. So I actually have 2 books with Literary Wanderlust, which is the press in the United States. One is actually a fantasy series. It's a new adult book with a queer female lead who's very much the bookish nerding type, but she's in a sisterhood of disciples of this religion who fight a darkness that wield magic uncontrollably throughout the land. That's much more slower pace. It's much more passive. It's definitely lacking, say, as much agency in that main character as opposed to Isla, who's the main character of the Queen of Spades series. And then I've got the other book with Literary Wanderlust, which is a gothic noir. So it's a paranormal dark romance set in 1920s Los Angeles. And it's very much... Good. I'm very fond of this book, and it's kind of outside my normal scope of science fiction and fantasy, but it has these wonderful, subtle storytelling elements to it. And I knew that I was onto something when my mother turned around and said to me, I was reading this and I forgot that you wrote it.
Oh, so that's always a beautiful compliment, isn't it?
Particularly from one's mother, who's very well read and quite the critique.
Oh, okay. So this one came with no bad critiques from Mum.
No, but she did get into a lot of trouble when she started telling everyone at the hairdressers what happened in it, and it hadn't even been contracted yet.
Oh, no. Yeah. You might want to sit her down and discuss future
There was definitely
works.
Words had over that particular instance, and I said that she wasn't allowed to do it anymore. She wasn't going to get another book like it.
Yep. Sorry, Mum, you have to wait till it's on the shelf now.
Yeah, pretty much.
From the bookstore.
Yeah.
So you mentioned elements of paranormal through there, and now Ayla, who is your assassin in the Queen of Spades trilogy, as you mentioned and as is made clear in the synopsis of the book, has the ability to foretell other people's day of death. And I'm just wondering, did that come together for you when you were putting to, like in your imagination, putting together the character? Did it start off as someone who could see, had that prophecy sort of ability, and then became an assassin in your mind? Was it the assassin and then you it developed into with that skill, or was it something that came to you in as a package, while you were dreaming up the story?
So Isla was always a very interesting character to write because I have my own personal experiences with death that make me quite jaded but accepting of the subject, and I found it she was a very easy character in her indifference to death in order to equate myself with the same with her and to get into her mindset, because she ends up not caring about when people would die, because while she could be an assassin and while she could control that to some extent, she had the attitude, everyone is going to die eventually. You cannot control it, you cannot stop it, there is nothing that you can do about it that is going to change the fate that's in store for you. As much as you try to do other things or be someone else or whatnot, one day it's going to happen to you. It happens to all of us. So she then takes that And I started to think about when I was writing her what she was like and what made her the way that she was, because I was already like, this is very dark for me, but I went through a period of about 10 years where I was going to 1 to 5 funerals a year. And I got very cynical about, well, it does explain a lot about the character, and is certainly definitely an outlet for the other emotions aside from grief I had about death. And so when I was writing this story, and when I was developing Isla as a character, I wanted to know where she got it from. I knew where I'd got it from. I wanted to know where she got it from. So the opening prologue is actually a scene where she realizes for herself for the first time, if she can't stop Seth dying, she can't stop anyone dying. And Seth is her little brother who dies in an accident. Yeah. And it's a very short scene, but it's the moment. And we all have moments in our lives where they change the way that we think about death. And some people don't, you can sometimes tell when you talk to someone about death whether or not they've actually had somebody die in their lives that was really personal and close and hurt them. And it changes the way that they think about death and the way they responded to it. So when I was developing Isla, it was about a woman who'd already been through this, but she looks at everyone. It wasn't just the people that she loved or the people she knew. It was every single person she ever saw on the street. She couldn't hide from it. She couldn't run from it. So she embraced it. But it made people scared of her too, because she could change the day that they died. And it ended up being a weapon to her that she uses to defend herself. And then it became a weapon she could use to make lots of money and get rich as an assassin so that she could live the life that she wanted. But behind all of that, as the story develops, you actually find that she has her own fears about it too.
That's such a unique premise, and as you're talking, I couldn't help but think or feel that it's a beautifully written character and put in such a cool story, because in a sense, so really from my perception, there's this element of existentialism that actually becomes a tool, and then almost ironically, existentialism becomes a purpose to life, which is the opposite of existentialism, which when there is no purpose and there is no meaning in anything. So that's interesting, and I do agree with you. I think death. Everyone approaches death in their own way. Obviously, our whole globe is divided, at a fundamental point through religion, which is ultimately a discussion on what happens following death. So there's no shortage of ideas, thoughts, and beliefs. That's for certain. But you're right; it affects all of us in our own unique ways. So what I found really interesting, what you mentioned before, is rather than bring your own motivations or your own aspects and relationship with that has grown around death to the character, you've used your emotions, or I guess your belief system or understanding of death, as a springboard to then investigate the source of the character's relationship with death, which I think that's a fascinating approach.
Look, it definitely has that part of me in it, and I don't deny that for a moment. But I think the other part that is worth acknowledging here is going on a complete segue, talking about this gothic noir in Behind the Veil. So obviously I do have this close association, and I am writing it out of my system, and my stories have evolved over time as I do sort of express myself, because as a writer, that's what you're doing, and my thoughts about death, about the way that it affects our lives. But Behind the Veil's premise is really interesting because it acts as almost as a counter to Queen of Spades, in that it's set in the past. It is also paranormal, and the main character in it actually has the ability to read the veil between life and death. So what she does is, it's set shortly after World War I, and she spends her time giving occult sessions to people who've been affected by death, people who are grieving and they don't know how to end that grief. And she does it because she wanted the same thing after her husband died, but she had latent psychic abilities that made her able to see his spirit that was haunting her. But she went to a psychic who she had an extraordinarily bad experience with, which I will not spoil, but it meant that she was able to awaken her own psychic abilities, and she helps give comfort that she was unable to give as a kind of penance. So there are a lot of scenes in that book where she's talking to people who've lost someone in ordinary circumstances or extraordinary circumstances, and giving them comfort and the ability to move on past their grief.
Well, so you're definitely covering quite a spectrum of the death and its relationship with the living, so to speak, and grief and the ability to not so much conquer grief. I don't think you conquer grief, but the ability to make peace. So from Queen of Spades to the Last Prophecy, it sounds like you do shift right across that sundial, so to speak, which is interesting because when I read that opening chapter, and obviously you were kind enough to answer some questions prior to the interview through email, and you did say something about how names play an important part in when you're writing. And I had a bit of a look into the name Ayla, who is the main character of the Queen of Spades series. And I found it a very basic definition to have three basic definitions, which is, I think it was Turkish based, to mean oak tree, halo, or moonlight. And now I thought it was quite unique then, but after what you just told me about the themes behind the veil, it makes it even more so, because I mean that's three very unique attributes that I guess together they conjure a strange, like a juxtaposition between, for me, when I'd sort of read those three words, between a tree of life, the division between death and the eternal, and you know that moonlight part being that mysterious spiritual element. Was that something? Is that how you read into the name, or was there a particular reason you chose Ayla?
There is a very particular reason I chose Ayla, and it's actually a massive spoiler for book 2 in the series.
Oh, okay.
But you are dead on the money, and it's definitely got its own purpose. And in fact, originally, I went through several renditions of this book. So this book was written from a first-person perspective, from a very angry woman back in 2015, and I wrote it, and I thought about self-publishing it. In the end, I just put it on the back burner because I wasn't happy with it, and I knew that it was going to be part of a greater series because my muse is an evil little creature who likes to make more of these stories that I'm ready to actually write. And so I wrote book 2 and part of 3, but I wasn't happy with them, so I went back later on at the suggestion of someone else and a writer friend of mine and changed it to third person. Part of the reason I did that, and I'm not even going to lie about it, part of the reason I did that was very uncomfortable writing sex scenes, because the book does have sex scenes and there's not many of them, and they are not graphic erotica because I'm not comfortable writing that. But they're definitely moments where that does happen. And yes, spoiler alert, Ayla and Leith do get together. It is a romance.
Well, see, the thing is, if you're writing violence, it doesn't really matter. But I think if you want to write an explicit sex scene, one phrase or word out of place, and you'll take the reader straight out of it because it becomes complete cheese. Oh,
absolutely. But the other thing you do remember is that I wanted to write this as a romance that wasn't about the man. And what I've tried to do with Leith is I've written somebody who's actually take a lot of the attributes of my husband. He's very patient, he's very understanding, but he's also incredibly sexy. So he does there are certain ways that he talks to Ayla or deals with the way that Ayla behaves in order to evoke a emotional response from her that is driven by desire. But he does it in such a way that throughout that very first story, he makes it clear that he's not to be used. He's not about to give in to his desire to have sex with her, for her to use him and discard him in order for her to go and live her own life and escape from effectively being dependent on him. Not that she couldn't do that if she really wanted to, but throughout the book series, he does everything he can to help show her what the future is like, show her what she's capable of, but also teach her how to live, which is the other part of the whole death thing. He teaches her that before she was frozen, she didn't really have a life. She ate and she drank and she slept with guys and did all of that stuff, but she wasn't alive. She wasn't living her best life. And it's one of the things that Leith actually teaches her. And just touching back on her name for a moment, in the original story, when it was first person, he was actually called Leith.
Aha, I see. So a halo under a moonlit sky on an oak tree. Say no more for Leith. No, that's very interesting. And you said obviously Ayla doesn't need a man in this instance, but does he kind of represent when you say he teaches how to live? But is it also due to the fact that she travels to the future in essence, or is cryogenically frozen and then brought back out? Does his role become an educator in that sense as well?
Oh, absolutely. So he ends up it's almost like he's a very emotionally intelligent person. And that's often a lot of credit that we often, when we're talking about emotional intelligence, we often talk about women, and it's not fair because there are a lot of very emotionally intelligent men out there who are deemed as passive or waiting for the girl or whatever, as opposed to in a lot of action where you have a very aggressive man. And I'm going to give you a really controversial example.
Please do.
The scene in Star Wars where Han Solo kisses Leia.
Okay.
In the confines of the Millennium Falcon when they're repairing it, is overtly aggressive. Now, I've loved Star Wars for years, always have. But if you look at the subtext of it, in other circumstances, yes, sure, in the movie she kisses him, but if that was in other circumstances and she said no, what would have happened? And I always think that in a lot of these stories and whatnot, if the guy makes the first move, if the guy is pushy enough, we've been kind of taught that that's sexy, and it's really not. It's really, there's a huge subtext of consent in that scene. And in fact, a lot of scenes, I mean, one of the things that really strikes you about Harrison Ford when you start to look at him is not just him and himself, but what he represents at that time period, which is very impacting on me because I grew up watching a lot of Harrison Ford movies. So Blade Runner, in the scene with the droid, that if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. There's, you know, and even the scenes where he's looking at love interests in the Indiana Jones films. And I love Harrison Ford. I'm a massive fan of him. But when you step back from those and you look at them more objectively, a lot of them don't have consent.
You'll get no argument from me here, and you're absolutely right. And look, when it comes to movies, at least, especially perhaps late 70s, but probably no bigger criminal at it than the 1980s, because, like you said, it was basically the staple of romance, or of where, you know, boy chases girl, girl denies boy persists to like almost creepy stalker level, and
but
eventually
this hasn't changed. This is the thing that bothers me. This has not changed. We've put an idea of what sexual attraction is on the idea that you need to be pursued beyond your consent. Twilight is a perfect example. 50 Shades is a perfect example. And I know that's a whole other rabbit hole I don't want to particularly fall into today.
That's all right. It couldn't, because I haven't read or seen either of them. So.
I've read both so I can criticise them, I'll be perfectly frank. And I think that one of the things, and just retouching back on the purpose of Leith, I often get from romance readers, he's too passive. But to a lot of other readers, they really respected his emotional intelligence to get him to get, and this is done within the first book, he actually says to Ayla, I'm not going to sleep with you until you ask for me and mean it, and you actually do want me. You're not just saying it because you plan to escape or to run away or any of that stuff. You say it and you mean it because you want me. You don't just want to get laid. You don't just want to use me. You actually want me. And I think that that's a very strong emotional point for a man to have, because we often allocate those emotions to what a woman wants. I want you to want me. I don't want you to see me for sex. I don't want you to, you know, use me for a good time. I want you to want me. And this is the purpose. And this goes back to that original guy who turned around and told me to write romance because it sells. The way we view romance and the way that the romance genre is set up is slowly changing, but the amount of money that's made off romance is about non-consensual romance in a lot of circumstances. And women don't have a lot of capacity to change what they view as sexy, because it's physically ingrained within us that if we want a man more than our consent matters, then we must matter that much to him.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I'm not overly familiar with the romance side of things, as far as, you know, like the big industry of romance novels. You know, I'm a science fiction horror man, and non-fiction, but it does make me just sit here and quietly think to myself or question, because I think you make absolutely valid points. But if we were to take, for example, a snapshot of 90%, I'll say, of the romance, the current, the biggest selling romance books that perhaps are guilty or at least partly guilty of these emotional or consent issues that you've raised, I'm wondering, and it's a legit question, I'm wondering what your thought would be on what would be the percentage of authors that were female versus male. So I guess, is it because for example, if it's the romance audience, for example, let's assume for the moment that a good majority of it is ladies, and is it men writing for themselves as these characters that are willing to go beyond the consent lines of that are now well established or at least should be well established, or is it just an archetype that just refuses to go away by no matter who's writing it?
I think that you'll find that the majority of writers are men. The majority of popular writers are men. I mean, I just Googled it. And
in the
immediately,
romance,
sorry, not in romance. I just meant in general fiction. But if you're being specific if you're being specific to romance, no, the majority of writers are definitely women. But I do think that they do fall back on the Mills and Boon, the traditional bodice rippers and whatnot. And I don't think that there is anything wrong with that, because a lot of the time what you're writing in romance is you're writing a happily ever after. It is a core part of what it is to write a romance novel, is to write that they're called HEAs or HFN, which is happy for now.
Okay, I was going to say, there's never going to be a top-selling genre called divorced.
No. Well, this is the thing. I find that romance is now diversified as is diversified. You can find a niche for it. There's a very common and very unsavory law on the internet, which is called Rule 34. Basically is this: if you can think of a concept, there's going to be porn of it on the internet in some way, shape or form. And I think for romance, you probably find that absolutely there is. And I'll give you a really good example. Recently in Australian politics, there was the catchphrase, which is, and please excuse me, but it was, I'm going to just delete my own words, but it was big swinging DICK. And that was about the Australian Liberal Party. But my scandalous searching of this particular tag, I also noticed an author capitalising on it by selling her erotica set in Australian Parliament House. And I think that with a lot of the writing genre and the romance genre, there is a romance out there that's based around divorce. You will absolutely find it, especially
of course.
in erotica. And yes, in that regard, a lot of them are women, but men are definitely rising to the occasion. They're making a speciality of it. I don't think it's as much as their field anymore, which brings me back to my original point. A lot of that is not very well acknowledged, as opposed to romance is often treated as a very cheap writing. Yeah,
and I don't know why, because I mean, it's funny, because it's one of the biggest sellers. So there's nothing cheap about a genre that people love passionately. And, and sure, so it's easy to just think romance, Mills and Boon, but that's just not the case at all. Romance has just got so many different avenues. It's like any genre. I mean, you could go to horror, for example, and just look for books which is just about, the whole thing is just to focus on how the serial killer chopped up bodies with no real story. That's not horror, but there is a genre, there is a subgenre like that. And I suppose that same applies to every genre. There's elements that probably aren't popular to a certain degree, but have their audience. But yeah, look, romance is, where would we be as a society, as a human race without love? And I think it's one of those eternal questions of how do you discover love? How do you nurture love? So the books are never going to end. But as far as the aspect of consent that you've raised, look, I think you're absolutely right, but at least we have someone like yourself who's willing to slowly change those rules or those perceptions, or perhaps just start to introduce characters that can remind readers and authors that it doesn't have to be the way it's always been.
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing too is, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not the only author doing this. I have quite a lot of authors that I absolutely love. I was not ever originally going to write romance. I was never originally interested in writing a romance. But that didn't change the fact that I had a friend who was incredibly interested in it and wrote a lot of things in it. And she actually, it doesn't exist anymore, which is quite unfortunate. But there was a bookshop in Melbourne called Rendezvous, and it was solely a romance bookstore. And it was wonderful because I walked into it with the kind of cynicism you sort of expect from a lot of people, which I've since learnt is not appropriate or appreciated.
No, definitely misplaced.
No, and I fully admit that. But I walked through this store being vaguely amused at all the bodice rippers, and then I saw a book cover of a woman's profile from sort of her chest upwards, and she had a band-aid on her neck, and it was A Girl's Guide to Vampires by Katie McAllister. And I thought, okay, and it had a tagline on the cover, but it had basically a step-by-step guide. And being an absolute massive Buffy fan, I decided that this author obviously had a sense of humour, and I bought the book. And I spent years being hooked on Katie McAllister books, because one of the things that she did that I absolutely loved was that she definitely had her pushy love interests, like guys who were expressing how much they really wanted the female characters in the book.
Mm-hmm.
By the same token, she was very respectful when the character said no, it meant no. And I think that that's often when we're talking about a lot of the Me Too subjects and everything else, is not wildly acknowledged as being attractive in a lot of fiction. But that is changing. It is slow. It is certain. There is certainly instances of where this is very interesting territory in regards to 50 Shades, in regards to what actually saying yes means, and whether or not you're saying yes to just having intimate relationships or you're saying yes to something else. But it definitely, for me, the way Katie McAllister pictured that was that she could have her cake and eat it. So the way that she wrote it was that you could have somewhat pushy male love interests, but that she would not step over that somewhat blurry line that for a lot of women they aren't able to distinguish it themselves, which differentiates between what is strictly consensual and what is non-consensual.
Yeah, and I think that at some point a refreshing change has to be brought in, because how long can you play with the same trope over and over again? Sooner or later the right tropes, I guess, or new tropes and more compassionate tropes are going to come through. But I definitely think it's something that is, bubbling to the surface now. I know, look, obviously when you read on your own. So, but when it comes to, say, for example, if I'm sitting with a couple of guys watching a movie, I like my retro movies, so we're usually watching something from the 80s. But even some of the newer stuff, we go to the cinema. But if we do see that, it's basically the butt of jokes now, because it's so, for us, it's like, oh my God, who wrote this bloody screenplay or whatever it might be. So yeah, I definitely think there's a wind of change coming. Absolutely. It's been blowing for quite a while. And I think, maybe so lucky you walked into Rendezvous, and now I'm sure you're very happy to be writing romance with these science fiction and fantasy and paranormal elements.
Look, absolutely. I think that it's definitely not all that I write. So I think that romance definitely has its place in a lot of stories, and regardless of the fact that you categorize something as a romance or not a romance, there are a lot of books out there that are technically romances, because they do contain core plots about two people who are attracted to one another and who get together in the end. And that is the core two components you need for a movie. And I'll give you a really good example I like to use, actually, is The Fifth Element.
Oh, it's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a good movie, definitely.
I know, but it's a romance.
Yeah, you got me on that one, because I'm trying to remember who got...
So effectively,
Bruce Willis and
Mila Jovovich,
Jovovich.
and basically she's the fifth element, and he's just a cab driver, and he ends up saving her, and they go on this weird science fiction journey together where she's sort of trying to work out what people mean, because she sees a lot of violence and a lot of cruelty and a lot of death, and she's learning about the world and the way that it works and trying to find meaning and purpose in that, while you've got Bruce Willis, who's used to doing violence, and he's playing Bruce Willis. I mean, honestly,
Yeah, of course.
What do you want as a character description?
I can remember most of it. I couldn't remember if they got together or not.
They do. In the very end, they end up together.
Oh.
So, and I think that's the thing about the way that I've written this story with Queen of Spades, is that there are a lot of stories out there that are not about the romance, but the romance is definitely a huge part of it. And I think it's part of our basic desire to belong, to want, and to be wanted. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the reason why consent matters, and it's part of the reason why it's such a popular genre, but we've been made to feel so ashamed of it because quite often it involves the very touchy subject of sex. And one of the reasons that I'm very careful in the way that I write my scenes is because I don't want to, there are quite, I'll be upfront about this, there are quite a few scenes in Queens of Spades across the entire trilogy when it is just about them having sex. It's not about the emotional connection. And it's for stress relief, and it's for whatever's happening in the story. And it's because of what Isla's going through, or what Leith's going through at the time, based on sort of where you are. And it's because we do definitely use it as a stress relief and as a coping mechanism, and also a way to connect, really connect with another human being, which helps really ground us. It helps remind us of what's important, and it helps remember us to enjoy life and being alive.
That's right. And you said the magic word, human being, and you know, I don't think there's there shouldn't be any shame or anything. The sex in a book can be for a myriad of different reasons, as long as it comes across as representation of what it means to be human, unless of course there's some weird space alien race. But do you know what I mean?
I promise you that that's not something that's going to come up. Although I'm not going to lie, there is only one alien in my entire series, and his presence is incredibly purposeful. And it's also just about who we are as people, and I'm really encroaching upon spoilers for book 3, but it is really about who we are as people and what it is that we tend to do as a species.
My favourite subject, absolutely, well, besides a lot of them, but no, as in the human race as a species, you know, because you can look at it as it becomes a character on its own. And I think it's such a fascinating thing to look at, especially when you incorporate an external viewpoint. For example, you've just introduced possibly an alien that may be looking. And so I'm guessing at some point you can delve into the state of the human race without being part of the human race. I guess is the point I'm trying to make, which can be fun.
It definitely can be, and I'm not going to encroach on that. I mean, I think that everybody has their own things that they do and don't like about science fiction and the way it treats aliens and whatnot. So you can have, I'm a massive fan of Gareth Powell. He writes the Embers of War series, which is just absolutely delightful. His prologue is upsetting in just how well it's written. It's absolutely staggering, and I can pretty much recall it word from word to this day. And I think the way that you have aliens is just as another species or another different mindset in your stories is really, really interesting, because you have that different viewpoint and all the stupid thing we do, like microwaving pizza. But I think that there's, you know...
Yes, come on, people, we have air fryers now.
Yeah, no. Well, it's that joke that goes into, I think it's from Tumblr, that talks about how we prefer our food at certain frequencies as opposed to other frequencies, talking about the way that heat works. But another series that I admire very much was the Anne Aguirre series. I think her name is Anne Aguirre, who, when she talks about aliens in that series, is done with this kind of different mindset that I really like the depth that she went into with the character development for one of the alien species that the main character throughout the entire series, Samantha Jax, gets familiar with. And that particular character, to me, just really presented this alternate viewpoint of the way that we view the world and the things that we do, but came with its own baggage about the way they view the world and how it inflicts what they do. And I think that's the wonderful thing about science fiction and fantasy, is you can really start to say to yourself, okay, this doesn't make sense. There is a lot that's wrong with the way that we as human beings think about the world.
Well, almost by its very nature, you have to think on a galactic level, really, for a lot of sci-fi. And that means, okay, what if we're not the only species, or which, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, if somebody says, I don't believe in aliens, like by the very definition of the word, we are an alien. So I could never work out that logic. It's like, we're on a planet, we're alive. The definition of alien isn't whether we can communicate with them or not. It's just, can they exist? Yes, they can exist because we are. We do. But yeah, you're right.
I really like that philosophy.
Well, I can't understand how we could be defined as anything else but, you know, I mean, alien, we're terrestrial here, but as far as in a galactic viewpoint, we are an alien. I mean, that's obvious. So to say that there can't be others is neither here nor there. But speaking of science fiction, and you obviously have a big love of science fiction and fantasy and even romance. And so we're talking here about thinking galactically and whatnot. And you're obviously very, very, what's the word for it, I guess? Productive when it comes to your writing, because you've just got so much work out there. And you mentioned that you went back and actually rewrote the Queen of Spades series from a first person to third person. So there's a lot of work involved. But I also read that part of your writing process, music plays a very significant role as far as in sitting at your desk. So I have to ask, EJ, when you're writing, for example, if you're writing science fiction, do you sit there and write with a backdrop of, say, for example, like futuristic soundscapes, or if you're writing a little bit more of a fantasy edge, do you have those symphonic, very big, sweeping music, or do you prefer traditional music and just go with the flow?
That's a very interesting question for me. So I'll preface this by stating that as somebody who is neurodiverse, I'm very effectively influenced by overwhelming emotions from certain input, and I definitely use sound as a purposeful tool to trigger certain emotions in order to get me into the right headspace to write. But having said that, I tend to have a very set series of actions that I do when I'm going to start writing a novel. So writing Queen of Spades was written to a lot of Battlestar Galactica, but also a lot of Angry Girl music. I'm not even going to lie about that one. But I also listen to a lot of alternative music. So for example, in my last Prophecy series, I have a series, one of the particular books is set in an alternate, the whole entire series is set in an alternate Earth. So a lot of the names are meant to evoke the British Empire or the Russians and whatnot. And I have effectively got an American visiting the KGB. But one of the stories that comes immediately after it is called A Phantom Presence, and it's about a police officer working almost against the KGB to track down a series of murders and strange events and whatnot. And that was actually written to the soundtrack for Ender's Game. So, which is obviously the science fiction. Yeah, no. So I often will do that. I'm actually writing my first openly neurodiverse space opera, and I've listened to a lot of very alternative music. One of the people I've listened to a lot is Scala, who they do a lot of trancey, relaxed, deep, soothing sort of tones that do tend to still have their pressure moments. There's one song in particular I've listened to a lot writing this. It's called Delac's Bedroom is the name of the song. And it's just got this soothing backdrop trance kind of feel to it. And it's because a lot of the time the main character is moving in her own awkward neurodiverse reality that is beyond her control, and she's very responsive to. She waits for things to happen and then responds to them, as opposed to when she's hacking, which she does via virtual reality, where she's a lot more active but a lot more confident because everything's in her control. So everything that I write, I will be able to say I wrote this story to this soundtrack.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful.
Yeah, everything that I do, there will be a soundtrack, a lot of instrumental. So I don't like voices because they tend to tell you what they want you to think, whereas instrumental just allows you to feel, regardless of its synth techno bass line or whether it's completely operatic sort of like just completely instrumental music.
Yeah, I think that's, I've got no doubt you could probably remember each soundtrack for each book you've written too. I'm probably, I mean, I love working with music, but I do it a little bit a different way. I'm very similar. I think we're both on the same page when it comes to the emotional impact that music can have, or especially certain inputs. So, for example, if I'm trying to write, I can't listen to music because it will actually take over my emotions, and I find it can interfere with when I'm working on a scene. However, saying that, as soon as I've finished the first draft, then I've got to get in there and start with that magical scalpel and start editing. Depending on each chapter or each scene, I will play instrumentals, of course, whatever music's going to match that scene. And so it feels like it's like a rediscovering the story for the first time, because it's kind of like going back from not a silent movie, but going back in and adding a whole new magic element to the story. And then the pulse. So if it's an action scene, there's like action music, and then those edits I make are going to be really in line with the mood that I'm in. But so it's definitely a powerful tool. So interesting to hear how you utilize music.
Definitely, and I am in that wonderful space where I can listen to a song on repeat for hours, and part of it's just my personality, and part of it is the fact that I'm neurodiverse and can get hyper-focused and obsessed with the particular song. So I will often use a particular song on repeat to write a scene, and I use Discord to do writing sprints. So I just put the emotion and how I feel into the writing as I'm listening to the song, and then I go back and cut out all the trash to make it much more streamlined and much smoother. But then you also, this is going to bring this right back around to what we were talking about before, because I'm listening to a lot of high tension music in a lot of high tension stakes scenes, it means that the writing comes across as pretty breathless, because in a lot of high action scenes, you don't have that moment to breathe. And I think it's both what's a lot of people like, but can be a detriment to my own writing, because I'm confident enough in my own ability as a writer to criticize the inherent flaws I have with my methodology. And I work on improving them, as everyone does when they're trying to do this, but also it's a very useful tool to be able to acknowledge that that's what it is that I'm doing, and then use it appropriately.
It's interesting because you mentioned time sprints, and that's actually one question I've written down that I wanted to talk to you about. You, in the questions you answered kindly enough for us, you did mention that you use time sprints to get words down the page. So I was just wondering if, for our writers out there, if you can maybe elaborate very briefly how the time sprints approach works, and how did you come across it? How did you discover it?
So that's going to go right back to when I started to learn how to write back in 2014. I decided to be part of the first NaNoWriMo, my first NaNoWriMo. So for those of you who don't know what NaNoWriMo is an international competition over the month of November where you challenge yourself to start a new project and write 50,000 words in that project. And so a lot of people use it as a great tool to jumpstart books, to get through their word counts, to really build up on their stories. It's a very great introductory tool for new writers, because you spend a lot of time making new friends, learning from industry professionals, and helping develop you as a writer, but encouraging you to keep going. One of the key things that you often find about new writers is that they can't finish a story. And sometimes it's that whatever story that they want to write, or whatever they've been inspired to write, doesn't have the hook or the girth that it needs in order to finish it. And sometimes it's just about not being lazy and sitting down and doing the work. Because at the end of the day, no, I'm very sorry. I'm a Darren. I'm going to rip this Band-Aid off. You got to sit down and you got to do the work. And one of the beautiful things about time sprints is that you need to sit down for the set time. You can do nothing else, and this is very self-disciplined. You can do nothing else but write during that time period. And when you're starting out, you'll go, okay, I'm going to do 15 minutes of non-stop writing, and you'll write 50 words and cry and wail and carry on and say you'll never be a writer. And that's just the start, because it's like everything that you learn how to do. You always start out a bit wonky. You're never going to be perfect. I've been doing this over 7 years now, and I can write 3,000 words in an hour, and they're not all crap.
That's a pretty damn good effort.
It takes years to get to that level. It takes a long time, and it takes not a daily writing habit. I don't write every day. So I'm here to tell you, all those people telling you have to write every day are wrong. I definitely spend time on writing. I'm here doing the podcast. I'm going to be doing a bit of editing later and maybe a little bit of writing, but I didn't do any writing yesterday, and I did spend a lot of time working on writing. I was plotting out another novel. So you don't have to write every day, but writing sprints are a great way to make it a habit, which is what you want to do if you want to finish that novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just wondering, over those years of using time sprints, now you mentioned you can get basically, what did you say, 3,000 words, 5,000 words in an hour?
3,000, I'll be... I don't think I can type fast enough concurrently to do 5,000.
Let's do 3,000.
My best score has been 3,000 words in an hour. I will average between 2,000 and 3,000 words an hour nowadays.
But more importantly, you said you've reached a point where they're not all shit. So, which makes me wonder, is it like a muscle in the sense of, have you trained yourself to get to that point mentally, and I guess in that wheelhouse of your imagination? So, but when you sit down at the keyboard, have you worked out a way where you have the idea in your head, but then you've taught yourself how to transcribe it almost into sentence format before you sit down to the keyboard? So in essence, are you doing a lot of the actual writing in your head? Do you know what I mean? Like you're actually subconsciously, consciously creating the very sentence structures that's going to appear on the page, or is it just that you think you've developed that ability to just stream your thoughts out and let them flow?
I'm going to do you one a little bit further here, Darren. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna yes, absolutely. And I think it's because I've spent a lot of time. At one point in time, I was working with 5 different editors on 5 different scripts. I'm used to getting a lot of critical feedback for my writing. I'm used to being told how to write correctly and being tutored how to do a better job of writing. And with all of these influences and this ability to accept critique of my writing, it does definitely help you develop as a writer. And what I want to do is express that when I first started writing, if you look at the first novella that I published, it's not the first novel I wrote, it was the first novella I published. I haven't gone back and edited that as severely as it needs to based on my experience now, knowing that I wrote it 7 years ago and that it doesn't have the context, it doesn't have the emotional maturity or depth of what an opening scene requires. So if you go back and you read that opening scene, it's about an airship captain called Katarina Salisbury, and she's basically describing what she's wearing, which is a terrible way to start a book. It's a terrible way to start a book. As opposed to, and I'd like to just read a small snippet from my latest draft.
Please do, absolutely.
Just to give you an idea of the difference. Now, this is completely unedited. I've literally just opened it on my computer. But as opposed to that first draft that was polished by an editor and went over with multiple times, if you use it in comparison against this story that I'm writing about steampunk thieves in this alternate world where a young woman is out to try and get her crown back after her father is kicked out in favour of a democracy. And this is the opening scene. Rats scuttled over stone, through the sloshing excrement of Cresta and over my boots. Once I would have screamed. A past attempt at hissing earned only bite scars. You did not fuck with the rats of Cresta. Not after a mad scientist poured his concoction to make people stupid into the sewer system rather than let the authorities take it. The vile green goo permeated not the humans, who quite frankly didn't need the IQ drop, but the rats. Only they'd gotten smarter. With slitted eyes, I watched the rats move in single file, some carrying food, wire, one a bundle of cloth tied to its back with string. One rat among the throng stopped and turned its head. Jade eyes glittered at me. One rat you could stomp on, 50 was a problem. I closed my eyes, forced my tense body to relax against the slick stone and sighed. There was a rustle, and the rats moved on.
Kind of throws you straight into the moment, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing about learning to be a writer. You don't become a good writer overnight. And this is the thing I really want writers to walk away with if you are an aspiring writer, is that had mistakes. That's had lots of mistakes. I can look at that and go, how many times did I say only in that sentence? But as a sprinter, that shows the development as opposed to somebody who's never written a book before trying to write the opening scene, as opposed to somebody who's been writing for 7 years writing their opening scene. And this is the thing about anything. It's like riding a bike. It's like learning how to be a professional gymnast or archer or baker or knitter. You start out with the general tools, you get some people to help you and guide you, you put a lot of yourself into it until you can start coming up with something that people will want to read. And that's all there is to it. It's like any other skill. And after that, it's just about where you'd like that skill to take you. And part of that is, discovering what kind of a writing journey you'd like to go on. Do you just want to write that one book inside of you and then you'll be happy with that? Are you looking at turning writing into a profession? Because you can be a professional in this industry and still not be a full-time writer. I think the statistics are quite disheartening to hear that many of us can't write full-time, and those of us that do still run into the struggles that you will run into as a writer with a job. And that's all about the creativity and the editing and coming up with a good story that people want to read.
Yeah, no truer words are spoken. And you're right, you can be a professional author but still need to work. I mean, it all just depends on there's just so many things. But first and foremost, it's a craft. You can bring skill to the craft, but that skill isn't going to come with the mastering of the craft. It may give you an edge. For example, if you come with a bunch of skills, natural skills like an athlete or a musician or a scientist or a physicist or whatever it might be, but the craft itself is not anything that will be mastered overnight. And it takes other people, it takes yourself learning. It's that whole educational approach and journey. And it's obviously something that you've taken very passionately. And I mean, 5 different titles, 5 editors, that sounds like a psychedelic nightmare to me already. But now, obviously, you began your 21 book series in 2014, and now you entered the self-publishing world around 2016, and then you were actually published for Beyond the Veil in 2019.
I have to quickly jump on you there.
Please do.
Behind the Veil doesn't have a release date as yet.
Oh, sorry, signed the publishing contract. My apologies.
I signed the publishing contract in 2019.
My sincere apologies.
And I am crossing my fingers for a publication date of this year.
Yes,
but we're just doing some finalization. That script, I'll be perfectly frank with you, that script did require a lot of edits because I wrote it in 25 days. And that's just, I wrote that when I realized that I would need to stop self-publishing because me and my husband were trying to save for a house. And I hired an incredibly good editor in Scott, and he was absolutely wonderful and absolutely patient. And he has taught me lessons that I still carry with me to this day in regards to writing, my writing, and the way that it is that I'm expressing myself. He was an invaluable teacher, but you want to pay an editor their due worth. If you are self-publishing, one of the things, and I cannot stress this enough, is you need outside opinions. You definitely need to look at getting an editor to make your work as polished as it can be. And even then, I got pulled up in a review of Queen of Spades where the review wasn't as flattering as it would have been because she thought that I hadn't got an editor, where I had got an editor. I'd had 2 very devoted critique partners, I had a copy editor, and I had a proof editor, which shows that mistakes still filter through the system. So if you are looking at self-publishing, I cannot stress enough that you do need an editor, but you want to pay them for the work that they're doing. It's only fair. And that was very expensive for me, which is why I turned to, I stopped writing the Last Prophecy series, and I just wanted to write something completely different. And I started out with an idea, and I sent the first chapter to a friend of mine, and she said to me, and I said, what do you think of this? Is this a short story? What's going on with this? And she read the first chapter of Behind the Veil and said to me, no, this is a whole novel and you need to write it now because I need it now.
Yes, always good feedback.
Yes, no, she's very lovely.
So obviously you are transitioning from, well, you signed the traditional publishing contract in 2019, but when it came to, you obviously put a lot of work in self-publishing, and I couldn't agree more as far as the importance of an editor, or at the very least have multiple people read it so that any issues can be seen, because you can read your own sentence 20 times and it's like that psychological video test thing with the bear that walks past the screen and nobody notices it because you're watching everybody bounce balls. You just will not see stuff, even if you think you've gone to it with a microscope and a scalpel. Sorry, but
I call it looking for butter in the fridge.
There you go. Of course, it's not in there. You're definitely 100% sure it's not in there. And then someone goes and pulls it out and make toast. Yes. But when it came to, I'm just curious, when it came to your marketing for your self-published series, have you got any hints, tricks, or tips that you found was quite effective?
Absolutely. And if you actually head over to my website, ejdawson.com, I've written many articles on the basics of marketing and what you kind of need. A lot of people find the whole idea of having to market incredibly intimidating. And as somebody who is neurodiverse and very internal and withdrawn a lot of the time, and it's taken me a long time to be more external and outgoing, one of the hardest things you can do is marketing. One, because it requires you to be outgoing. Two, because it's expensive. There is no other way to say it is. And one of the things that I want to reassure people is that as somebody who turns to more traditional publishing because I couldn't afford my own editor, there are cheaper ways to go about it. And the most that you can do is research. Do your research. There are so many resources out there. There are so many people who are willing to help share their information. There's all different things from having social media platforms that you can micromanage so that you don't have to feel awkward or stressed out about performing on them daily, to places where you can advertise your novel or give it away to book bloggers so that they can put a review on it for you on places like Goodreads and Amazon's. There are many tools out there to help you do this. The intimidating part of being a self-published author is being your own marketer, being to a large extent your own editor, resourcing the people you need to do the parts you can't do, finding a cover artist, talking about making actual physical hard copies of your book, and whether you decide to do that through Amazon or whether you decide to do that from Ingram Spark. For every question you out there, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of authors like myself who have done it and who have differing advice. And the best thing that I can tell you is go and do a lot of research. Find out what genre you're actually writing in, because that makes a huge difference to who you market with and how much you spend. But most of all, and this goes for writing too, always make sure you go with your gut. If you don't think that it's the right decision, don't make it. If you don't think that it's the option for you or it really is too much money, then don't spend it. It's all about making sure that you do promote the book, you do what you can, but you don't do more than you can.
Couldn't have said wiser words. Absolutely. Marketing is daunting, but it's also, it can be an incredible journey, just like writing your first book, or even every book is a journey. But if you're going to self-publish, I just think there's so many other avenues there to rather than, it's going to be daunting, but turn it into something really enjoyable as well. So if you're going to be one of those authors that designs their own book cover, have fun, go to town with it, really enjoy the process, and then enjoy the process of finding someone who can actually complete your vision. And then you may form a bond, or you may learn different, you may discover you acquire a taste for a new style of art too by doing that. And same with marketing, embrace it, treat it as an adventure. Start off, don't go throwing all your money into every marketing strategy that come across on top 10 lists on stuff. Just slowly look into it. Like I said, do the research, try one little trick here. Did it work? No. Okay, move on. If it worked, yes. What worked about it? And yeah, there's going to be pitfalls. There's going to be brick walls. There's going to be mistakes made. But that's what we do every day in that wonderful, magical, mysterious, sometimes painful thing called life. And so if you are going to keep writing, then why not at least take the reins? If you're going to be self-publishing, then do your best. But you want to do your best as far as writing a book. So do your best as far as marketing, or at least looking into what tools are available and how you can approach your marketing strategy, and just because ultimately the goal is to get your book into people's hands. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And to give an example of the things that you can use, one of the things that I often run across for self-published authors is the fact that they don't do very good covers. And a lot of the time it's because they don't know things like, they think they have to use Photoshop, which is a very difficult program to use, but it's also incredibly expensive. And there's things they don't know, like there is another program called GIMP 2.0,
yes,
which you can get YouTube tutorials for that teach you how to make the book. There are so many blogs and so many YouTube videos that show you how to make a cover that gets people's attention. There is even a internet browser program called Canva that I actually use to make all my social media posts with, and I often use their templates. And I don't use it for book covers, but you can. And with a lot of book covers, you can often just get the, and this is the important part about this, I'm going to stress this really, really strongly if you are self-published, is make sure you get the commercial licensing on the photos and the font that you are using, because you would not believe the amount of trouble that you can get into if you do not do that. But once you've crossed that particular bridge, you find that there are a lot of programs out there, and I do talk about them on my website and how a little bit how to use them. And there are heaps of YouTube videos about it, because I'm self-taught. Nearly everything that I've done as an author, aside from editing and developmental editing, I've had to teach myself. So, and if somebody who has such an emotional learning disability as myself can do this, then even if you too have that have that learning disability, that you can do this too. And yes, you may need help, but there are so many step-by-step blogs out there that can help you, show you how to do it. There are so many Facebook support groups. There are so many people on Twitter who, if you just ask, will say to you, yep, this is what you need to do. And it's just about learning how to ask. And one of the things that you'll find about pretty much every writer that you go and speak to is that many of them are absolutely 110% willing to share with you how they do stuff, because they went through this same learning curve and other people taught them too.
Yes, and look, obviously you said you've been self-taught, and regardless of whether neurodiversive or not, I think there's no denying the fact that just from what you've told us just then and some of the things you've told us earlier, definitely going to be a huge inspiration for a lot of listeners out there and a lot of writers, a lot of first-time writers, a lot of long-time writers. I'll be definitely taking a real good look at your website because I'm forever looking into marketing hints, tips, and tricks. And there's nothing better than talking to someone like yourself who has embarked on this journey. One, that's always the hard thing, to embark on it and take that first step. But two, has maintained their journey and has not stopped and keeps pushing through. So you're 7 years into your writing journey now. You've crossed so many crevasses, so many mountains have already been climbed, no doubt all weather conditions have been pushed through. And that's why it is such an honor and so awesome to have this opportunity to chat with you today, EJ. Thank you for coming on the podcast and letting everyone know about all of these amazing aspects of your writing and what's involved in the way you think when it comes to your characters, and where a lot of these inspirations come for the themes. Now, obviously, we will be put all the links from anything we've mentioned into our show notes, but would you like to let our listeners know where they can find you, if they're anywhere besides your website?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter a lot, so I do have a Facebook page, but if you look up at Ej Dawson author on Twitter, that's where you'll find me on a more day-to-day basis. There is a massive writing community on there that I'm very interactive with. So please look me up there. Please also feel free, if that's not your preferred platform, to reach out through my website, ejdawson.com. I'm always happy to answer any sort of questions that anyone has, either about my writing or about how I've become a writer. And I just want to say, Darren, thank you so much for having me today. This has been an absolute delightful conversation.
No, it has been awesome. And you heard it out there, listeners. If you have a question and you're struggling with some aspect of your writing or of your marketing strategy, or simply finding the right steps to be able to begin the whole journey, EJ has just let you know you can reach out and ask her questions. And I think that is one of the most beautiful aspects of writing and the writing community. And so for that, thank you so much, EJ. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to finish this little podcast by actually quoting one of the answers that you written for us earlier. One of the questions put to you was, who helped you most when you were starting out? And I think it's a pretty fair question. And I think it's, everyone out there starts out. So I think it's one of the most important questions. But your answer really blew my socks off, because so I'll just read this out for everybody. So, quote, knowing that I would make mistakes, that not everyone would like my work, and acknowledging that I wasn't here to make everyone happy. I was here to write books that for a time would steal someone's reality, end quote. Now, I absolutely love that. I love that term, to steal someone's reality. And if you ask me, I think that quote should be put on a nice, big, shiny coffee mug, and I'll definitely buy it. So, EJ, thank you so much for your time. And we really do hope that we have an opportunity to chat again real soon. So perhaps as soon as you get some new news on Behind the Veil or any exciting news, or even just so that we can have a chat again, it will be wonderful to bring you back on board.
Thank you very much, Darren. It would be wonderful to be here.
Awesome. You take care. And everybody jump onto AustralianBookLovers.com and have a look under our science fiction and fantasy genre, where you can find book 1 of the Queen of Spades trilogy, Awakening, and click that Learn More button to learn more about EJ's whole back catalogue, where you can find her website and further information. You will not be disappointed.
And what a brilliant interview with Ej Dawson. She is so generous, so giving in her knowledge about books and her own practice and the whole industry. So, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. So thank you so much, EJ. And hey, let's do it again soon.
Yeah, and The Fifth Element, one of my favourite movies of all time. Go, Bruce.
Ah, yes, I love a good floating taxi.
Love that. Yeah, it's one of the Strachan family movies, The Fifth Element, because I used to make the kids watch it a lot. But yeah, so we can quote a lot of the lines from that. Gary Oldman and Mila Jovovich. I probably said that incorrectly, but yes, fantastic movie.
Yes, no, she does a lot of the genre films. Yeah, definitely. Never stopped working.
That's right. She's in
Resident Evil series.
That's the one. Yeah, the Resident Evil. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay, so don't stop now, though.
No, we've still got a whole heap of entertainment to come.
Indeed. So what I want to mention is our lovely big surprise is that there is a reading at the end of the episode. So after Darren and I have traded quotes, and we've got a book review, as I mentioned, but we've also got a reading from Ej Dawson, her book, Behind the Veil. It's a gothic noir set in the 1920s Los Angeles during the rise of occultism. So this their script was acquired by Literary Wanderlust, and it's not out until October. So you are getting a sneak peek of a whole chapter of Behind the Veil. And
baby, nothing better
putting
than
that on to be read pile.
Yes, well, yeah, nothing beats a little secret sneak peek.
Yeah, so it's just fantastic. So I was very privileged to be able to read that, and not only that, but to read the whole book. It's like, oh, this is so exciting. So yes, I would have been fangirling all over the place if I'd interviewed EJ. So probably just as well that I didn't.
Well, I guess technically, unless I'm can be proven otherwise, technically the reading that will follow our little quote sharing, technically that will be a world first.
It will be a world first.
A world premiere.
Absolutely.
Yes. So that potentially is our very first world premiere on the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Woohoo! So thank you, EJ, for letting us make that bold claim. And I'm sure there's tons of readers out there that are just salivating at the idea of that new book coming out later this year.
Yeah. And it's completely different to the sci-fi series, The Queen of Spades. Very different. Still that same confident voice, still, a brilliantly strong woman doing lots of fabulous things. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. However, what EJ's interview with you inspired me to chase up in terms of quotes was a little bit about, she talked about own voices and people not standing for being put in boxes and people for speaking up for, what they believe in, and that these days we don't, accept nearly as much of the isms as we did, and we're gradually working through them. So there's a quote by Angela Davis, who is an American political activist, and the quote is, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept."
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's a bit of a good bite.
Yeah, I like that.
You got me thinking now. I was talking to a gentleman today who was talking about, he's got a friend over in America, and I can't remember the name of this political activist who is gaining a whole lot of ground. And fundamentally, they are neither the left nor the right, but believe, that there has to be some sort of balance. But now, I may butcher this, but apparently they're basically their signia is Hawaiian shirts and weaponry like guns, rifles. So they cruise around in Hawaiian shirts and carrying guns, but which sounds really cool. But yeah, but their philosophy, I think, is based similarly on that exact quote, in the sense of there's no more just saying, well, I can't change that. More a case of, can no longer accept it not being changed.
No, that's absolutely right. So the same as Reconciliation Week, it's more than a word. It takes action. So, me going along to the learning a bit more about acknowledging country, I do some donations to the, regularly donate to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. I try and read more diversely in terms of not only Indigenous authors, but it's also opened me up to reading more than just, I guess, European based, and that's American, Australian, European based, but looking at not only people of colour but also all different nationalities, and it's amazing the histories and the worlds and the imaginations that people bring when you don't just read the things that you love, but you think, oh, I'll try that. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
like
that
what have you got
definitely is
for
a quote
us?
with a bite. I've got one from, by author Catherine M. Valente, and it was inspired by my little rabbit hole into space operas and whatnot. So this quote is, "Life is beautiful and life is stupid. This is, in fact, widely regarded as a universal rule, not less inviolable than the second law of thermodynamics, the uncertainty principle, and no post on Sundays. As long as you keep that in mind and never give more weight to one than the other, the history of the galaxy is a simple tune with lyrics flashed on screen and helpful, friendly bouncing disco ball of all annihilating flames to help you follow along." I love that.
Oh, that is very good. Yeah, no, I do like that. Tongue in cheek. I like it. It brings me in mind of Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah,
and those terrible people. Oh, those terrible people who the government, and they love the bureaucracy, but reading poetry and it's dreadful. Yeah, very good. But no, I like it. Nice one.
The crazy thing is, with the times we're living in now, the sarcasm has become reality. So where do we go for sarcasm now? That's what's scary. But anyway, nonetheless, what is your second quote?
Rightio. So my second quote is from George Bernard Shaw. So although apparently known at his insistence simply as Bernard Shaw. So he was an Irish playwright. His influence on Western culture, politics extended from, sort of the late 1800s. And he died, I think he lived to a ripe old age. So I'm pretty sure he was in his 90s, 80s or 90s when he died. But his quote, which I've had this one, this is one of my faves that I've held close to my heart for quite some time. "You see things and you say, why? But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?"
Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah. Or I thought the final word was going to be, and I say when, but why not? It's the same thing. Yeah.
Why not? Because that for me kind of wraps up the whole genre of science fiction, which is the what if or the why not, so yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it just, I don't know, there's something about from a young age, or at least speaking for myself and all the kids I grow up with, there's the fascination with space from the minute you can sort of open a book, and it never ends, does it? Like, as in the joy never comes to an end. The opportunity to explore your imagination through outer space, it just grows every day. And the longer I live, because the more
closer we're getting.
Yeah, but also the more lessons you learn in life, the more you can read into the future. Like, the more you can speculate in the future with your imagination. For example, about technologies and life. And so definitely dream and say when or why not. I couldn't imagine waking up having fantastic dreams and the only thing I could think to myself is no. Oh, horrible. I say no to decaf coffee. I'll never say no to dream.
All right, give us your second quote.
Okay, this one's a bit shorter, and this one is by a gentleman called Brian Aldiss, and the quote is, "When knowledge becomes formulated into a science, then it does take on a life of its own. often alien to the human spirit that conceived it. So yeah, I like that one. Obviously, I wouldn't have picked it. Yeah, and I think it sort of draws. For me, it draws a little bit of a, I don't know, underline under the fact that I think, you know, ultimately science doesn't create anything in the sense of universal laws or physics or anything like that. It simply reveals them to the best of our ability. So, you know, I guess a little bit like, was it Plato and his forms, where the concepts are in that nether region, but, you know, we just happen to tap into them like a frequency. But yeah, because I mean, we didn't invent math, we didn't invent the atom. So, you know, there were all these, but so when we formulate it into a science, really, we've just illuminated new understandings of the universe, but those understandings, take a life on their own, don't they? For good or bad. Yeah.
And in fact, Brian Aldiss's series, so the Heliconia series, which I read many years ago, and I've still got my copies, where people step through into the Pliocene era, and then have to start life all over again, and to see how they develop their life all over again really brings to life what you were talking about in terms of the development and, you know, new worlds and having to set up the whole culture and thing all over again. So yeah, that was really fascinating. I remember reading that. Maybe that's another one I have to reread, another click.
Well, all I know about science fiction,
thicker than the Lensmans.
Well, they're all fantastic, but if I had to pick up one negative, it would be that for nearly half my life, I was sure, well, at least by post 2000, we would have hovercrafts, our own hovercrafts, and we don't. Still got boring old rubber wheels on the road. Well, nothing we can drive.
Well, on the main roads,
I want something I can Jetson style. But then again,
we've got electric ones now. Hybrids becoming more available for the general population.
Yeah, but can it go on there?
No, not yet.
No, this is the problem. But then, you know, the more I think of it, I'm thinking traffic's bad enough to run down the shop, let alone if we could fly, then it'd just be absolute madness up there.
Yes, yes. I'd much rather blink. Let's get to the whole telekinesis and, you know, the using your mind just to, you know, get yourself to another place. Bend space and time is what I'm all about. Never mind.
That can't be far off. I mean, Musk has got the neural implants. So as long as there's an alpha stage, there'll be a, you know, the technology will leapfrog, and just like the microchip. And at some point,
although I am actually reading Emoto's Promise. I know I read a lot. It's terrible. I got too many books on the go at one time. I'm reading Emoto's Promise by Shel Kaloba, which is another one of the Dead Set Press Drowned Earth series. And without spoilers, this takes place in Darwin, where people may remember that the series is based on the fact that an asteroid drops into the ocean near Australia and floods a good portion of the continent. So this takes place in Darwin, where the city is actually behind a huge wall, but 99% of the population have been plugged into these neural implants. So maybe not so far away.
Maybe not far away at all.
Yes, Emoto's Promise by Shel Kaloba.
Do I want to do it? I don't know. I'm happy in my VR, but the beautiful thing is
would you like to get something plugged in?
I can unplug it and walk back and go on the beach. And
but when you think about it, we've got the ears. What do you call them?
I've got ears. Do you have ears?
Thank you. Bionic ears. Bionic ears is what I'm trying to say, and they've been around for a while, and now getting,
absolutely.
You know, better and better. Yeah, allowing people who are born without hearing or with minimal hearing to get some great hearing happening. Anyway, we digress. We probably need to wrap it up, Darren.
Yes, I think so. And make some room for a fantastic reading and a book review. So please stay tuned. And now this should be a pretty good tagline excerpt, but if it's not that good, don't feel bad and turn it off. No, I'm only joking.
No, but if you do want to hear, and if you want to hear more or read more about Australian authors, don't forget to go to the website, which is www.australianbooklovers.com. You can find us on Twitter at Australian Books. And on Facebook and Instagram, we are at Australian Book Lovers, and you'll see, you know, we share some more of the books and bits and pieces, and we also highlight the podcasts that are there. And as we say, we are up to number 19. So start listening, peeps. And if you'd like to leave us a review on your favourite podcasting platform, whether it be some stars or a few words. We would be very happy and appreciative because it helps our podcast rise to the top of the algorithm and more people get to listen.
Yes.
There you go. And now we're ready for the tagline.
Well, yes, and let me just say, episode 19, that means Australian Book Lovers is officially hitting the nightclub scene, because that is the time. So grab a book, hit the tables, get under the disco ball, and support some great Australian authors while we are, who knows? Well, when did nightclubs end, I reckon? Maybe we'll call it 22. Maybe 22 will start transitioning again. But episode 19, it makes me feel like nightclubbing. Woohoo! Okay, but yes, as you were saying.
All right. Remember to read more Aussie books. Oh, that was pretty good.
Not too bad. Still a tad under 9, but in the high point, 8.7. Yeah, but thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for being a part of the show, and can't wait to join you again for the next episode. And remember, stay tuned for some great entertainment.
Bye for now.
Take care.
Behind the Veil by Ej Dawson. Read by Veronica Strachan. Chapter 3. It was cold when they kicked him out of the pub. Joseph only wanted to buy a bottle to take home. They hadn't sold it to him after he vomited in the gentleman's. But tonight, of all nights, he needed it. Just like every other night, really. The rain drenched him, but he didn't care. All he wanted was a drink. He didn't want to see his family sitting around the table praising his brother John for the promotion at the bank. Declining the dinner invitation, Joseph had made excuses before John's mocking laughter caught him at the door. "Let him go, Mother. He's tired already." Joseph had proven to himself that his level of sobriety was nigh on angelic then, compared to what he was now. The world swam, and he struggled even to see in the dreary light. He was lost. The streets kept turning about. The normal route that should have taken him up Beverley and on to Gardner found him on Vista. Rain turned to sleet as he stumbled through the sleepy streets. It was lucky, he thought, because if he hadn't been drunk, the cold would have bothered him. He'd get home. The rain had momentarily confused him. As the rain turned to frozen slush on the pavement, the slippery surface caught his unwary feet. There was a flash, and the sidewalk was level with his eyes. He blinked away stars, feeling an echo inside his head, and the world went black, street lamps dying out, only to come back. Joseph studied them, fading in and out, waiting for it to stop. A part of him assessed the damage, cold and distant. This was bad. He'd fallen and given himself a severe concussion. It wasn't the first time. The last time had been... Joseph tilted his head to the side so he could retch, agony rushing through him, sharp this time as he spat out the contents of his liquid dinner. "This is no good," he muttered to himself, staring at the amount of vomit on the pavement. Joseph got to his knees and his stomach regurgitated yet more liquid, the stench of alcoholic bile bringing up everything until his body was curled in its own excess. Pain lanced through his head, an iron spike that squeezed his eyes shut, and he didn't see the men walking toward him. "Tad ossified, sir?" one asked. Might be. Joseph slit an eye open to see 2 policemen there and breathing a sigh of relief. At least he wasn't about to be robbed. That would have been the highlight of the evening. Or possibly it had turned worse. It was the police after all. "I'm trying to get to 161 South Gardner," he said, searching for excuses not to be dragged to the drying out tank. His father wouldn't bail him out, and when he threatened like he had tonight, he meant it. "All good, sir," the policeman said. "We'll get you home." They picked him up under the arms, the journey foggy until he was standing in the porch's light. The policeman knocked on the door, and Joseph couldn't stop them in time. The maid opened it, her mouth dropping open at Joseph's state and the presence of 2 officers. "Oh, I'll get Mr. Norman." She dashed off. Joseph tried to pull away to stand on his own 2 feet, but even with his stomach empty of alcohol, he was still drunk. His head hurt, thumping in pulse to the angry pounding of his father's footsteps. "Thank you, officers," his father said, and shook their hands, a glimpse of paper in his palm. The officers' smiles were wide at the thick wad of money, the cause for their kindness, which continued as they tipped their hats and left. "Walk around back and get in the guest house, boy," his father intoned, not letting Joseph in. "I will not disgrace your mother by letting you into this house. I will not let you ruin John's good fortune because you've pissed your own pathetic life away. You were a doctor, and then you drowned in a bottle. I should have told you I was disowning you, but I didn't want you to come home like this. You're a disgrace." It went on. Joseph stopped listening, and he didn't even notice when his father shut the door. How long he'd been standing out on the porch he was uncertain, the world's tears falling on his shoulders. He turned around, walking around the outside of the house and down the side path to the guest house. The door handle didn't want to open. The deck chairs around the covered pool were inviting, even with the cold, but the bitter chill was getting worse. He had to get into the guest house. There was a gas heater inside if he could concentrate long enough to open the door. Another shove pushed the door open, and it slammed when he fell against it. Stumbling steps took him to the centre of the room, but looking about, it was as welcome as the rain-covered chairs outside. Dust sheets covered the furniture and became the ghosts of his past. Silent and accusatory, he waited to hear their pleas to make the pain stop, though they were naught but memories. Standing alone in the dusty space, Joseph fell to his knees and cried. No family, friends dead in the war. Few that understood what being in the medical tents was like, what it did to you night after night. The endless screams and the visions that haunted him. During the day now, it was worse. He could see them during the day. He could see them right now. Letitia wrenched herself away, manifested as physical reeling, and her hands slapped down on the table. The end had been so subtle it had wrapped about her with the tentative touch of a spider, coming closer to bite her and share the death with Joseph. She gripped the wood, absorbed the warmth in her palm, sweat on her upper lip, and a chill on her skin from the cold of Joseph's death. "Miss Hawking, are you all right?" Mrs. Norman asked. "Please," Letitia said, before quieting her tone. "A moment, please." The traces faded, fingers of death slipping by her as she recovered her breath and grounded herself in her own body. Letitia didn't know what she would tell these patrons. They wanted to know it wasn't their fault, and to be sure Joseph hadn't passed with regrets. The guest house was an eerie reminder of their transgression, but it wasn't because Joseph was there, since he was glad to be gone from the world. It was their own guilt. "Miss Hawking," Mr. Norman said, voice gruff, disbelief on his face. Opening his mouth to contest her, she cut him to the quick. "You were there, at the door, when the policeman brought him home." She watched the skin of his pale cheeks become reddened, and she pushed on. "You told him how unimpressed you were after the police left." Letitia didn't stop, even as Mr. Norman glanced with shame at the now sobbing Mrs. Norman. "You told him to go out the back, not to make a fuss." Letitia changed the sentence, rephrased it so Mr. Norman wouldn't be any more embarrassed than he already was, and at least now Mrs. Norman knew what had happened. She could guess for herself what exchanged between her husband and son. "And at the end?" Mrs. Norman asked through a series of tearful hiccups. Letitia chose her words with care, wanting the Normans to go away at peace, but warier of how to treat their other children. "Joseph was relieved to pass on," Letitia said, watching the father close his eyes in reprieve. "You were right, Mr. Norman. He wasn't fine after the war, and he didn't know how to make it better. This would not be the first time someone has come to me with a son or a husband who was stolen by the war long after it ended. But Joseph saved many lives. He did dreadful things for those lives, but there are men who went home because of him. Not whole, but they went home." She let silence fill the space. "But he never said," Mr. Norman exclaimed. Letitia said nothing as he stared at her, fury and shame burning pink brands on his cheeks. "He isn't here," Letitia said, "and he's far better for it." Mrs. Norman clung to her husband, who was now wrapping an arm around her. "I'd like a moment with my wife." "I cannot leave the room, Mr. Norman," Letitia said, apology in every nuance of her words, "since what I have done today is difficult and leaves behind a residue." "We should leave, William," Mrs. Norman said, composure returning as she rose with the help of her husband. "Thank you very much for your time, Miss Hawking." "I hope I've brought you some level of closure," Letitia said, coming to take Mrs. Norman's outstretched hand and allowing a brief embrace before she pulled back, both arms on Mrs. Norman's shoulders. "Now go home, and when the spring comes, clean the guest house from top to bottom. There is nothing there than an echo of another victim of the Great War, and he does not reside there." Sniffling, Mrs. Norman went to the door. Mr. Norman was behind her, holding out his hand for Letitia's, and, like the incident with the policeman, there were folded notes in his hand, at least another $20. Letitia stared down at them before lifting her eyes to see the desperate hope of Mr. Norman. If she took them, he would close the matter, the last page of a book. The certainty was so stark in the lines of his face, she didn't need to open herself to see his personality. He was revolting enough as it was, and it left a sour taste in her mouth. "Mr. Norman," Letitia said, low enough for his ears alone, "you've paid me for my services already, and now you need never bring your family the shame of disowning your son." "You saw?" He stopped, hands clenching around the memory. She met his gaze, and after a long moment he was the first to break away. Letitia went to the door where Mrs. Norman had put on her coat, and the pair left, Mrs. Norman the only one to look back for a final goodbye. There was no sinister figure on the landing, and Letitia closed the door. But something about the session was wrong. Nothing too untoward occurred. It was smooth from beginning to end, except for one small anomaly. Letitia went to the table and sat back in her chair, and instead of looking at the bowl, she tilted her head back to glance at the chandelier over the table. It had candles in some of its holders, placed to cast the right light on the mirror that hung from its centre. Round and twice the size of the scrying bowl, the chandelier was suspended from 3 chains, making it secure and avoiding sway as much as possible. It was tilted at such an angle so that when Letitia looked into it, she saw the scrying bowl. This was a different type of seeing. The bowl would drag her in and take her to the critical moments before death to experience it herself. Letitia always found the exact cause before she sought a person's end. Innocent and accidental deaths were easy. She'd take a few gentle moments to relate to loved ones without getting too close to the cause. Others were in sickness or injury, even the battlefield itself. She'd be with them until their death approached. Those who died at the hands of a murderer were not forewarned, or what little they saw came too late to Letitia. It was why she would not take murder cases. There were instances where the victim succumbed to shock before death, or were even taken unaware. Delving into their fate when she wasn't sure what was coming risked her dying with them. Old Mother Burrows hadn't wanted to talk about what happened if Letitia got that far. But then she hadn't needed to tell Letitia. Her own experience had cut her to the bone, tore her soul to shreds, and left her a wreck. Old Mother Burrows was lucky to find enough sense within to repair. When Letitia used the mirror, they were simply visions, the sensation akin to the images that played in her head as she read works of fiction or watched a silent film at the cinema. But like the bowl that could drag her into the death, so too was the mirror dangerous. She could become lost in a reading. The chair was her safety. She would fall to one side or on the table when she became too tired. There was no such safeguard against the scrying bowl. She read the scrying mirror. It was far easier to slide into its vision, which reflected the remnants left in the scrying bowl of Letitia's last visit. Though it was still distant to her, she knew what she sought. Joseph's death replayed in her mind, but this time she was only an observer, not lost in his emotion. She was a figure on the street following him home, watching him fall over, remembering his subsequent pain. The humiliating scene at the front door was 1,000 times worse at a distance, without the alcohol or splitting pain to distract her from the horrible words of Mr. Norman. For a moment, Letitia wished she could have made Mr. Norman squirm all the more, but it was a brief and selfish wish. His tirade abated when Mrs. Norman came looking to see who it was, and Mr. Norman shut the door without a backward glance. Letitia studied the scene from across the street, but now she came closer to Joseph, not watching him, but the shadows. Nothing alerted her senses or was wrong about the situation, but she followed him, fading into the guest house. Joseph stood in the centre of the room, crying before falling to the floor and curling up into a ball against the cold and all the nightmares the world had given him. Letitia knelt beside him, aware of what was coming and unable to stop it, but still she touched Joseph's forehead with a cool hand. A figure leaned over her. She shrieked, slamming onto the floor as she came off her chair. Broken out of the vision, she stared around her ordinary session room. The shadow had disappeared, but there was no mistaking its presence. The figure, while terrifying her, had a discernible difference from the one she'd seen behind Mr. Driscoll. In the world of visions, she could evade its form, even if the sense of dread was triggered by her own underlying fear. Unlike the being who'd glared over Mr. Driscoll's shoulder, this figure had emanated no such ill intent within the vision of Joseph's death. But if a being of shadow haunted her sessions, then being anywhere near Mr. Driscoll could risk the very damage that left her body scarred and her mind on the edge of its sanity. No amount of money would bring Letitia willingly back there, not when she'd already experienced what lay beyond the veil. Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray by Anita Heiss. Love and loss set on the timeless lands of Wiradjuri country and encompassing all the majesty and terror of the Murrumbidgee Bila, the Murrumbidgee River. Bila Yarrudhanggalangdhuray is a beautifully written love story that brings a historical focus to a true event. The river flooding of 1852 in Gundagai sets the scene for Heiss to weave a wonderful tale of Wagadani finding her place in a world of white men and always being drawn back to her own people and country. I loved reading the Wiradjuri words, hearing the stories of connection to land, love and respect for country, and seeing history from Wagadani's view. Elevating, educational and emotion-charged. A great read.
Let's meet again. Where magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.